missing Tana. Let me look again. Oh, Tana's here. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, action.
Okay, welcome. The special board meeting of Monday, June 15th is now called into order. If all would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and mute your microphones. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Jane, can you please take a roll call for us?
I will. Board President Galbraith,
Present.
Vice President Morgan,
Present.
Board Secretary Scott. I'll make a note of when she comes in. Board Member Cullen.
Present.
Thank you. Board Member Coleman.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, I want to welcome everyone out again for our meeting tonight. We have a couple of great presentations that will be given to us later. It shouldn't run as long as our last meeting is what I believe. So we'll see how we do. We will start off with our superintendent, Dr. Cleveland, giving us some opening comments. Dr. Cleveland.
Thank you. I will keep them short because we have two great presentations, and so I would like, we've already talked about it in the previous session, but I think just for the public would be important to reiterate that on Thursday we will have a special session of the New Mexico Legislature. During that session, we'll be looking at the state's budget. We're hearing a lot of different things about what might transpire. But the bottom line is there will be reductions in spending across the state of New Mexico. One of the ones that will be an important issue for schools is the issue of the CARES money, for which districts believe that money would be coming to offset the unanticipated costs of the pandemic. And I believe that that was in fact the federal intent of that money, was to help schools in the short term as they dealt with things like protective equipment, we dealt with things like costs to convert to a digital format almost overnight, costs to get people connected to the internet. There's a lot of unanticipated costs. And so there's some discussion about whether or not that money will come to school districts or whether it will be taken as credit by the state. And we're really hopeful that's not the case, because many districts have already spent that money for the things that they were told that they needed to buy in order to be able to continue public education in the state of New Mexico. But we are very anxious for that session to take place. We do need to know what kinds of reductions we will be dealing with, and we'll have a very short timeline for turning that around before the end of the fiscal year and the beginning of the new one on July the 1st. So that I think is probably the most pressing thing that we're looking at right now is what happens with that funding. What also goes along with that we hear that we should have some direction by Friday of where the state sees the opening of schools going. And what we do here is that there will be some flexibility, but that will depend upon where a community and district lies in terms of the number of people in that area that are infected with COVID-19. So we have been rapidly hoping to get that direction, because that will be the parameter that we will have to work within to run our schools in the fall. So some big things I think are happening this week that will have a tremendous impact on every school in New Mexico. And we certainly will keep the board informed about that. And we will also be keeping the community informed about what decisions are made and what we believe the impact of those decisions could be for the Rio Rancho Public School District. And our two presentations today, we are continuing the presentations we had last week. Today, we will be looking at safety and security. What are some of the things we need to be thinking about in terms of keeping our students and our staff safe? The other will be on our staff and student services, and both are equally important. How do we protect our students? And how do we protect our staff? Because if our staff is not well, we can't provide for students. And so what will that look like? What are the things, again, we need to be looking at? We'll be focusing more on what do we do if it looks different than the traditional year. The traditional year, we kind of know how to do that. We've done that for a really long period of time. So much of the effort is, what if we don't have an opportunity to do that? What would be the things we would need to consider if, in fact, we were not able to return to school in a traditional manner based on the public health orders? And all school districts, as are all government entities, are required to follow the public health orders that are issued in our state. And we as a district have tried very hard to do the best we can with those orders. And one of the things we've asked is, we sure want the guidance. We hope that when that guidance is issued, that it will be, we won't be changing it a lot, so that, we can get moving. My last comment in closing is that, again, I want to be sure the board knows this is not the plan. What this is these are the questions. These are the questions that we've asked, and more importantly, are these the right questions that need to be asked? And so these teams have worked hard to answer those questions, to pose new questions. Once we know what the parameters are, then we will move to the plan. And the plan, and working on the plans, the specific plans, we do hope to include more people in the community, though we had community representation on all of the task force. And also to include more of the staff in our buildings who will have to make this work. So I will turn it back to President Galbraith, and we are ready to do those presentations in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Cleveland. We will now move on to approving the prioritized agenda and the proposed time allocations. Are there any questions or comments on the proposed agenda, the agenda as it is presented?
No.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
This is Board Member Scott. I move to approve.
Board Member Morgan, I second.
Okay. We have a motion by Secretary Scott and a second by Vice President Morgan. Jane, can you please take a roll call vote for us?
I will. Vice President Morgan,
Approve.
Board Secretary Scott,
Approve.
Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
thank you. Board Member Coleman,
Yes.
Board President Galbraith,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. You guys will mute your microphones back for me. That'd be great. By the time we get this all down, we'll be back in the boardroom. Okay, thank you, Jane, for that. So item F for public comment. Those who have wished to submit public comment have done so and sent that into, somebody has, it might be Dr. Cleveland, we got the news going through the, I'm just gonna wait a second. Dr. Cleveland, can you mute your microphone for me? Jane, can you mute Dr. Cleveland's microphone for me?
There was blood on the ground, a chunk of hair.
A babysitter says she took the 6-year-old with her sibling to a park.
Hey, Jane, can you hear me? Or Dr. Cleveland, can you guys mute the?
I can't hear anything that's being said. I'm hearing all this noise coming from it. But if it's, am I okay with the agenda? I'm fine with the agenda, but I don't know what you're asking me because I can't
Sorry.
hear it.
Okay, hey, Jane, can you mute everyone's microphones for me? Just everyone in the room? There we go.
I'm trying.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, we are good. Sorry about that. So we're on to public comment. There was a public comment that was sent by Ms. Dyer. The board has received that comment. It's in regards to sports and starting sports earlier than what the board had decided last week. And so Ms. Dyer, we have all read your comments. Thank you for sending those in. If there are comments for the next meeting, please call our district office and we will give you the information on how to do that. Okay, item G, approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion or questions on the consent agenda as it is? We just talked about this in our finance committee meeting earlier, this item. No discussion, no questions? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Is there a further discussion that needs to take place about the consent agenda? I do not have a second.
This is Board Member Cullen. If we could divide that up to from the Chromebooks to the tablets, make them 2 separate items for vote, I would feel more comfortable on that.
Okay. If Lauren hatches on, what I'm thinking is that maybe we move this into the agenda, or can we keep it on the consent agenda? Lauren?
I would suggest just moving it onto the regular agenda and then dealing with it at that time.
Okay. What is the correct place for this to be put onto the agenda? I'm trying to look through. Do we just move it to the end? Is that appropriate? Or do we just go put it first thing at the beginning?
Yeah, I would just accept a motion for where to place it and handle it that way by vote. It could go anywhere.
This is Board Member Catherine Cullen. President Colbert, I recommend moving the consent items, put them into the business portion at the end of the meeting. Towards the end, so item.
So it'd be
Hold on.
It would be H.
Eight.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Okay, I need to write myself a note. Okay, so there's a motion. So there's it was a motion, right? There's a motion to move the items, the BTR to purchase Chromebooks and scanners to make it item H in the business portion of our meeting. Do I have a second for that?
This is Board Member Coleman. I'll second.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion by Catherine Cullen and a second by Board Member Coleman. Jane, can you please take a roll call vote on this?
Yes, I will. Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott, Secretary Scott, I see you, but I can't hear you. I apologize. Or you left the meeting. I'll come back to you, Secretary Scott. Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman,
Yes.
President Galbraith,
Yes, and I believe Noreen is able
Secretary
to.
Scott. You approve? Secretary Scott,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. So that's approved 520. Okay, thank you. We will now move on to our business portion of our meeting, and we will discuss that item later. So the Board of Education met in a closed executive session on June 15th, 2020 from 3:30 to 4:15 p.m. under sections 10-15-1H8 and 10-15-1H7 of the New Mexico Open Meetings Act. The matters discussed in the closed meeting were limited only to those specified in the notice of a separate closed meeting. Okay, we will now hear from our we're at item number B, and we'll hear from our reopening task force and student presentation to the board by Tana Burgos.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland. I will be presenting the staff and student services task force reopening. As Dr. Cleveland mentioned, it is not a plan, but there are lots of pieces within this presentation that address recommendations, that answer questions, and also give scenarios and factual information and what ifs. I will say that this task force and everyone that's on it is, and I'll go over that in the next slide. I'm assuming, Jane, you're going to put up the presentation. Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you, Jane. So if you could go to the second slide. In the presentation this evening, we will hear from 3 other of our task force members, which actually 4, I'm sorry, Larry Chavez, Lynn Carl, Shelley Hubble, and Mark Willis. This task force is a lot of different areas and a lot of different information. So we tried to keep it as succinct and concise as we could to provide you with that information. It is not the end all. There are resources out there, we know, and I think really after this is our next steps as to what are we charged to do and what do we need to do, and what does that subcommittee look like for certain areas, such as counseling and making a subcommittee and making sure we have counselors on that, as Dr. Cleveland talked about, and social workers. So I just want to make sure we preface that. So on the task force members, as you can see here, we're Sue Carley, principal from Independence High School, Cheryl Clark, principal from Ernest Stapleton, Catherine Rodriguez, principal from Eagle Ridge Middle School, Peggy Johnston, District Office Human Resources, Larry Chavez, District Office Athletics, Lynn Carl, District Office Transportation, Bradley, District Office Transportation, Daniel Bonzel, principal from Clean Del Norte, Mark Willis with Sodexo, Arlene Montaneros, District Office Finance, Shelley Hubble, District Office Student Services, Beata Thorstensen, District Office RADA, Teresa Griffin Golden, District Office Special Education, Dan Berg, Community and Parent Representative. And then we had support from Renee Sacedo, our District Office School Improvement in the Secondary, and Janice Chenault, District Office School Improvement Elementary. You can see there at the bottom the meeting dates, the times that the task force met, and everyone was very involved and at all of those meetings and gave lots of input and feedback that was very valuable. The next slide, please. And this is similar to the other 2 task force that you heard from last week, is really what our commitment is, what our questions are, what are we trying to do for the district to really make those good, thoughtful, healthy decisions so that we really can make the best choices for our community, our students and our families, and working with our community. And so that goal is really providing you with this information so that you can make a better decision for our pre-K through 12 students in our community. The next slide. So one of the questions that we were tasked with was, how do we provide social emotional learning and mental health supports? How do we address increased stress, depression, burnout, grief? And so one of the areas that we started in the spring, which we will continue, and we're recommending we continue into the fall, is that the counselors did set up Google Forms at all of their schools where families and students could reach out to them, and then they could reach out to those students with those issues. And many of them had to do with SEL and how they could connect with them. This online Google form has been hidden for the summer months since our counselors aren't on contract right now, but it will be available and start back up when the school year starts, whenever we decide that is going to be. And of course, counselors will continue to contact students and families when they're on contract on a daily basis, which they did during the entire spring. The other thing that the task force talked about was recommending an online SEL program. We recommended Ripple Effects. It does not have to be Ripple Effects, but this is one that we are working with already with our at-risk youth, with our ADSAC counselors, which are alcohol, drug, and substance abuse counselors. So we do already have a partial license. We have already worked with IT on that license, and they have approved it, and they are okay with it. And so that is an example of an SEL program. It is pre-K through 12, the program is. For 1 year, it would cost $146,000 for all of our students through the entire district. I know Dr. Cleveland mentioned that there's discussion about the CARES Act funding and what that looks like and where that money will go. But that was one of our recommendations as a task force, so that our counselors could be also working with our students if we are partially at home or 100% at home. We also just wanted to mention that we continued our Mckinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, and we recommended, obviously, that will be continued, and we went to an online system where we purchased those items for our families, and we're able to get them those items. Of course, I know there's going to be a big discussion on special education and social workers and psychologists, and I know a subcommittee is being formed on that, but those obviously would be continued, and talking about those being online, 504s, our student assistance teams, all of those would continue. But we have to look at what is the plan so that we can look at how do we offer those and how do we continue those. The next slide, please. So support for staff is challenging, and we all know that. They've had multiple demands at home with having children of their own, some, and also working. So we have recommended to increase the current funds for the Employee Assistance Program, which is EAP, to support our staff. And this is run through the Human Resources Department, and we do have a fund for that, but we're requesting and recommending that we increase that fund so that we can offer more support to our employees. We also have a program called Spark, which I'm sure you're all aware of through IT, and this has been very supportive during the closure time. And there are specific SEL supports for staff, and these have been reviewed and are recommended for our staff to be able to use these as well to support themselves during this time. And just recently, which was a really, I have to say, amazing, and I know board member Wynn Coleman is going to be going to this training at the end of the month. And I just attended this 3-day training online. It was Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of last week. And then I had to do a 1-day prep work. And I and 13 other Rio Rancho Public School staff members, who included counselors, social workers, SEALs, are now licensed to be able to teach our staff an 8-hour training about youth mental health first aid, which is really amazing because we also have that capacity to be able to do it online and really reach a lot of our staff members. So that just happened last week. And so I think that's something pretty exciting for our district, because the means for us to be able to reach our staff, really, when you're looking at 2,000 staff for Rio Rancho Public Schools, really could open up the door for a lot of people to be able to have this training. And then that second wave, that second group at the end of the month, will be taking that training as well. And then also in collaboration, the next steps are to teach specific secondary students in the classroom down the road, the online youth mental health curriculum that we'd be working with youth. So those are some of the areas that we're working in and we're recommending to continue with. The next slide, please. And teachers can be provided professional development and given resources to incorporate SEL. And we just gave some examples. We know that all of our schools during this time did amazing things with our families and our students. But these are two examples that came from members of our task force. And for example, at Clinas del Norte Elementary, they started each day with a morning circle to build relationships and give students an opportunity to be heard. In this safe space, teachers were often find out if a student or family needed extra support. And then also, since SEL was a primary objective during the closure, they also use Google Live, Google Meet, and ESE also continued to make this the focus of daily class meetings during online learning. So we would recommend that that would continue, and that would happen at all of our schools. For secondary use, it would be of advisory homeroom daily to support daily contact with an adult for emotional needs, engagement, attendance, smaller group for teachers to handle 15 to 20 students instead of 150 students, and IEP case managers can make contact as well during this time. This would enable grade level counselors to also support during those times. We also recommended that our support for our AES and reframe programs for many of our at-risk youth attend, since there's a smaller number of students who can attend and they are better able to social distance with a better success rate. These students have high SEL needs and some have drug and alcohol issues too. And we have an ADSAC counselor we've hired who will be providing support for those two programs this next year. The next slide, please. So one of the questions we were also tasked, so this is the second question, we've left the SEL, and I do want to preface that we know there is lots of information out there about SEL and mental health and how to support. So I think it's really, once we make a plan, what are those next steps and what does that subcommittee look like to really drill down and be able to have all of those resources to support our community and our family and our students and our schools. So the second question has to do with FERPA and how do we make sure that students are safe and we're effectively socially connecting students. And so we really recommended, which was happening, was Google Classroom and also Google Live, until there might be something else that we feel like we need to do differently. Those are our recommendations. We will need support for managing students and scheduling, which is a large task when we look at what our plan will be. Continue our clubs and activities, even if it has to be online, and also continue our Impact Youth Mentoring program and the capacity that we can, whatever our plan looks like. The next slide, please. So what non-academic support and partnerships are needed for highest risk students and families? We have and we would continue our outside agencies that are working, and these are just examples of Southwest Family Guidance, Family Workshop, Children's Grief Center, any outside agency to create a facilities use agreement with our district and with the mental health support that we have to be able to provide that can. But these are some examples of those that we work with. We do recommend keeping health assistants in the nurse's office. This should not be considered a cut in the budget. We weren't saying that it was going to be, but we just wanted to make sure that we gave that information. Continued services, including food pantries and clothing banks, by reaching out to families that are at the highest risk with these resources and in-hand schools, invite them to the school in a supportive way so that they are comfortable in assessing and being able to be provided these items. Building a foundation of caring about those necessary and basic needs are really important at each school, and that kind of goes back to that SEL, is how are we creating that environment with whatever plan we have on a daily basis to connect with our families and students, and continue those partnerships with the faith-based groups within our community, which will be some information in here about recommendations, how some of our faith-based groups can help us. The next slide. How do we continue those efforts to secure more on-site health services? We didn't go very deep into this one because I know Sal's presentation is about health and safety. And so we only did some general recommendations where we said we would continue to have a nurse at every school. We need to look at how we use them in the fall for support for students and families based on the plan that is decided upon. Establishing a care room, and I know Sal is going to go into that after my presentation, of the isolation room. continued increased communication with our communities from the nurse and our weekly and monthly memos, and educating our families with tips and facts, and being really consistent and doing that as much as we can of getting the current information out there, because I realize there's so much information out there and it continues to change. The next slide, please. Identification of high-risk staff and assessment of personnel assignments. Could high-risk staff members work as a virtual teacher or a counselor? How can our counselors work differently with our students? So we would have to identify who are skilled and could implement digital learning aligned to content for students who are not on campus. We might be able to have people stay home, but we also have to make sure they're skilled and they're able to teach from home and really understand that digital platform. We would need to consider different roles for staff based on their needs and their health situations. We could provide hotspot areas and Wi-Fi's at our faith-based buildings. Our faith-based organizations could also provide workstations in their buildings for students to use those in designated rooms. And then counselor support for students while working remotely has been addressed directly through counselor contact with students via online request. And additionally, counselors would continue to work in that same capacity. And if we have an online program, they would be able to work with that program on a consistent daily basis. The next slide, please. How do we adjust job descriptions for digital staff, especially teachers? It was recommended at this time, changes to job descriptions have not been advised at this time, as many duties for blended or online learning can be addressed through site principals and academic improvement officers, and many job descriptions already encompass other duties as assigned. And then each department and school site would be responsible for creating and sharing expectation with their staff. HR would assist in this area if needed. The school improvement officers also could provide guidelines for instruction, and they did provide guidelines for instructional staff at the beginning of the distance learning, and we would continue that. That is a recommendation. The next slide, please. So how do we support transfers and enrollment? Aggressive efforts may be necessary in order to avoid funding losses, especially at a time when needs are rapidly increasing. At this time, we have not seen a decrease in our student services department transfers. We've had over, it's probably more at 1,350 now, and approximately 450 of these are out of districts. I do think that we need to look, whatever that plan is going to be, at different modes. If some students feel like they can learn from home, then we want to be able to support that. And that would be keeping our students. So I think we really just have to think about what that looks like as a district for those different ways to keep our students engaged and to keep our students in our district, and define that digital program for the district and what that's going to look like if we're going to do that. Offer parents an option to sign their students up for online only, but this could affect our FTEs as well. Next slide. How do we continue to use the use of Engage New Mexico and making sure we're re-engaging our missing students? We did use Engage New Mexico. It is a group who will work with students that we are unable to contact or unable to get to participate. They offer coaching to families. They send weekly reports. We were only able to use the service for 2 weeks because of the end of the school, but we feel like that they did a thorough work. They were able to contact students that we were not. And missing students will be a huge issue, and the students that need the most help would be missing oftentimes. And we would need to continue to use our truancy officers. One of the things our truancy officers did do, the two that we have, turned in weekly logs as to who they were contacting and what homes they were going out to, of course, safely doing so and following the protocol. So we would continue to use our truancy officers in that manner by emailing, phone calls, going out, as long as it is safe and following guidelines. Next slide. So this next two slides, you can see Lynn just popped in here, Lynn Carl. And I do want to apologize at the beginning. I did not introduce myself as Tana Burgos, Executive Director of Student Services, but I thought I'd just keep going and then I would say it at the end and let Lynn take over the next couple slides on how do we meet transportation needs and social distancing challenges. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome. This is Lynn Carl, Executive Director of Transportation. Good evening, President Galbraith, board members, and Dr. Cleveland. Transportation could be a big challenge for all of us. One of our concerns out of many is that we have 43 large general education buses. If we do social distancing on buses, that means students would be 6 feet apart, which means we could only transport 12 students on a bus as opposed to 71. That means per tier, we could only transport 516 students. In order to transport all, like the elementary students, because we use all of our large buses to transport elementary, we would need 234 buses with doing the social distancing on a bus. And we all know that's not going to be possible to get those. One of our options is to possibly stretch the busing requirement to 2 miles or more. In other words, kids would have to walk 2 miles at least to school, and anyone outside of 2 miles would qualify for busing. We are looking now at some scenarios to look at that, whether the walk zone would be increased by a half mile and a mile, and what that may look like. Should that happen, we would possibly need more cross guards, maybe work on a program to help get parents and any other kind of volunteers to help walk kiddos to school. So that's one of the options that we came up with. One of our concerns too about social distancing is it could be an issue in the bus loading zones at the beginning and the end of the day, particularly the end of the day when all the kiddos come out to load on the bus. And depending upon how many students they decide that we're allowed to have on the bus. Special needs students would be even more challenging. The attendants have very close contact with the students, buckling them into seats, helping with them with all kinds of things that they do on the bus. And additionally, they come into contact with bodily fluids. I am looking at seeing perhaps if we can get some face shields for them, and I'm getting some quotes on those. So special needs is going to be extra challenging for us. Additionally, a large portion of our drivers and attendants are over 60 years old, and so we must address their needs. There is something that Sal Maniaci sent me regarding having a plexiglass door by the driver's compartment to protect the driver from the kiddos. But because we have so many older retired people that want to drive a school bus, we're going to have to see what we can do to possibly protect those employees. Next slide, Jane. Thank you. Additionally, there is lots of talk throughout the nation, as we know, and in the state for having the drivers take the students' temperatures in the morning, possibly the afternoon. It looks like it would only be the morning. This could significantly increase route times. The time it would take to take a temperature while they board on the bus, even with the 12 students, if we're allowed 12 students on a bus, it could add possibly an hour to the route day, which means we would have to adjust bell times. One of the great concerns about taking temperatures at a bus stop is that anytime you're loading and unloading students, that is when it is the most dangerous for a student on a bus. A large percentage of bus accidents and fatalities are when students are loading and unloading. And if you think about the news that you see about people running stop arms, kids running across the street to get to the bus, that's where we have lots of problems. So we would increase that amount of time that student is in a more dangerous situation. Additionally, we would have traffic stop behind the school bus for a considerable amount of time, we're holding up traffic. And finally, the driver is not allowed to get out of their seat while they're loading and unloading. That is really for safety reasons. When that driver is in that seat, they have a whole lot of jobs that they have to do while they're sitting there. They have to look out that left mirror, and they're watching their stop arm to see if anyone's running the stop arm. They're watching for kiddos crossing the road that might get run over by those drivers running the stop arm. They're watching the kids come in the door. They're checking for see if any kiddo is distressed, has issues going on, checking for weapons, for drugs, and as well watching the mirror over there to see if any kiddos get close to the side of the bus or under the bus. So that would not be, they would not be able to get out of the bus, which would require us to have attendants on each bus to take temperatures. And of course, funding is always an issue for everyone. Transportation receives our funding based on the number of students we transport on the 80th day and 120th day. If we have a lot of students with virtual learning, of course, that's going to reduce our counts. We have no idea how the state would compensate for that. And in addition, if we do alternate days, some kiddos go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, others go Tuesday, Thursday. That would also reduce our counts significantly. So that's always a concern to us for our funding. And our potential costs for doing all kinds of things on the bus to try and help with the COVID for the coming year, depending upon what kind of regulations we have, could easily be over $3 million. And that's for additional staff, PPEs, disinfecting buses, things like that. If you can go to the next slide, please, Jane. Thank you. So this is a majority of things that we have come up with that could potentially create costs for us. Disinfecting the bus after each tier. In other words, every time they drop at a school, they would have to stop and disinfect the bus and then proceed on to their next school. That would add approximately an hour a day, which could also include necessitating changing bell times. We would imagine we're going to have to deep clean the bus. I'm going worst case scenario, 1 time a day, possibly once a week, but at once a day, again, $346,000 to deep clean the bus once a day, in addition to the disinfecting the bus. And that is for labor costs for the drivers to be working longer. Mask for staff for each day is around $71,000. Gloves for drivers in attendance each day is around a little over $12,000. Driver pay for overtime for taking temperatures. Obviously, if they're running an extra hour a day to take temperatures and or disinfecting the bus, they're going to be into overtime. So just that overtime for all those drivers and attendants on all the buses would be $693, $274 for each drivers and attendants. So that's a huge amount in labor. Should we have to hire 43 more attendants to be on the large general needs bus or general ed buses for taking temperatures, those drivers are also guaranteed 5 hours a day. So that would be additional regular pay for them at over $581,000. To purchase at least temperature check pads, Sal Maniaci found some iPad type devices where they could put their head up to it and record the temperature. Just to purchase those for each bus would be over $121,000. The plexiglass for the driver for the little door that we have all found would run about $240,000. They're about $3,000 a piece to get them and install them. And we also have to keep in mind that any changes we do to the inside of the bus, like the plexiglass shields, we are not allowed to alter the inside of the bus without the permission from PED. And that is for safety reasons and for bus inspections, and that is also state and federal DOT. I can't imagine we wouldn't get that approval, but we just need to make sure that happens. So just with the things we thought of, it's well over $3 million is a potential cost, additional cost.
Thank you, Lynn. The next slide.
You're very welcome.
Can I jump in just real quickly with this? Let's just share some information that's come in recently. On Friday afternoon, meeting with 2 of the deputy secretaries, we were told that they are probably looking at moving more toward the WHO, World Health Organization standards. And those standards are 3 feet apart. And so the PED is looking now at the 3, and the requirement for the 3 would be you could do them 3 feet, but you would have to do the mask as well. And then but again, who knows what's going to come out. But the other thing I did want to share, which was kind of a shock to me, is that conversation this morning with Scott Elder, the new APS acting superintendent. And Scott said that they had investigated and they had been told that the plexiglass shields cannot be used. And so we'd have to come up with something else. And he said he would send me that information. But again, I didn't even have a chance to tell Lynn because it was this morning. And I don't, but he did call to tell me that they had gotten a no on that. So we might, if you could do every 3 feet, you could carry 24 kids rather than 12. And if you did every other seat, they were estimating that we could carry about 30, maybe a little more than that. But again, those are all ifs and we'll wait to see. But that's what we heard Friday from the public ed department. And then Antonio was on that call. And so, it's changing all the time. But the one thing that isn't changing at all is that it's going to be more expensive, and it's going to be very, it's very difficult to envision exactly how that would work. And I think one of the things that Lynn shared with me, I thought was really pretty, important, is you can't leave a child who's sick at the bus stop. And what if by the time you get to the third one, you've already put the attendant off to stay with some other child who's ill? And so it opens a lot of questions about what do you do with children. Anyway, but that would be, even then, it's if it's the 3 feet, it's 24 kids and we carry normally 71. So even if you cut it in 50%, you're still not carrying even half. And we were pretty much assured there'd be no more money for new buses or for any of those other things that would make this an easier job to do. So I'm just sharing what we heard late Friday and this morning, and but it doesn't change the overall message at all.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland.
Yeah.
Okay, the next slide is with Mark Willis and Sodexo, and how do we meet food service and cafeteria social distancing challenges? And actually it's 2 slides, and I'm going to have Mark Willis speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tana. Thank you, President Galbraith, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland. I also want to thank Lynn Carl for such a, her slides look so much more challenging than my slides, so I feel much better after watching hers. But my number one goal going into the school year this fall is to ensure that we offer a healthy, nutritious meal to every one of the children in Rio Rancho schools. So that's goal number one. And there are 2 options to make that happen. The first option is offering lunches out of the dining room and allowing kids to social distance, come down from the classrooms, pick up the meal, and either have the option of staying in the dining room or going back to their classroom. We would limit the choices in the elementaries to just 2 per day instead of the 4 that we've done in the past. We would do that in disposable trays to help with the cross-contamination. We would eliminate the offering bars, the condiment stations, the self-service water stations, and we would also pre-portion the fruit and vegetable component. Each child is supposed to have 5 components through the line, or at least be offered 3 out of those 5. And there's a requirement for each amount of those food items. So the fruit and vegetable would be pre-portioned with the required USDA guidelines, which would make it a little bit faster. Children would be able to just grab a cup with a lid on it and go through the serving line much more quickly, but they would get a choice. Cashiers would have the barriers, the face mask, the daily body temperature checks, and we would also be able to manage the selection or capturing the cash through the point of sale if the students prepaid in advance, or if they brought down an envelope in the morning. That would be much easier to collect in the cafeteria than it would be in the dining room. This would have some impact for cleaning. If we kept all the trash in the dining room, there would be a lot less effort on the custodial's part to collect that trash and take it out. Sanitizing in between the lunches would be a lot easier in the dining room than it would be going back to the classroom. And then there would, just because we have that common place, we'd have much more control over the food safety. There's a purpose-built serving line that keeps the temperature of the food at the correct temperatures, and it would just be a little bit better for controlling the cleanliness and sanitation. Next slide. Option 2 would be delivering sack lunches to the classroom. This could have an impact on the amount of variety that we have if we chose to go cold only. We could do some hot entrees like we do for summer feeding, but that would require some additional equipment. And then it would take additional staff to deliver those to each of the room, which depending upon the amount of meals may affect speed of service in the time for the entire lunch period. Breakfast in the classroom and supper in the classroom is something that we've done in the past for several years. We've got that equipment in place. We've got that system in place. And if the waivers from the USDA do not change, those programs would stay in place. If there is a portion of the students that are homeschooled, we could continue to do the process that we're doing this summer, where if there is a parent pickup, there's waivers for that. We give out breakfast and lunch at the same time. There is no cash collected because it's all free. If that changes and those waivers change, then there would be some additional challenges for collecting meals out or money for the meals outside during that same time frame. One of the other options is possibly to capture all of the students is to deliver some of the meals via the buses. We did have transportation help this summer where we delivered about 150 meals to homes through, I think, 4 different routes. And that may be an option as we move forward if we have to capture those kids that are staying at home. And that's your
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So our next question was, can we request mandatory flu shots unless there's a physician's waiver, and can we pay for those who lack insurance? So we did recommend if we possibly could pay for some of our staff that lack insurance, depending on the circumstances, we might be able to do that. We talked about that and received information that we can't force staff to receive flu shots, but there's also staff that can't receive flu shots because of underlying conditions. Public school students' vaccines are mandated, so we do know that, and we do follow that. However, New Mexico does not require a flu vaccine for those those immunizations to be in school. We highly encourage the flu vaccines. We could also explore options of offering students at low or no cost partnerships with NMCA, and currently we do partner with Albertsons, and they did support us last year, and we are looking at doing that again this year. And one of the things we also talked about was to change or adjust our attendance policy for students and staff that are sick, which I'm sure would be a discussion through the New Mexico PED as well as to what that looks like during this time and with attendance. And that's a huge question. How do you continue to take attendance, and what does that look like? The next slide, please. So the next 3 slides, I believe it is, we are going to have Shelley Havel present. However, I just want to preface that the SAFE program and the Enchanted Mesa Daycare, those are both encompassed in these slides, are very important to our community and very important to our families and our students that attend them. And we are willing to do whatever we need to do to make sure that it works, depending on what our final plan is. We just have to know what our final plan is, and we will take that charge and move forward to support our community. So Shelley, you can go ahead and present, please.
Thanks, Tana. President Galbraith, members of the board, and Dr. Cleveland, the next 2 slides again will encompass all things related to Enchanted Mesa Daycare and our safe before and after school programs. A lot of the same requirements that pertain to athletics in our district and around the state also pertain to our programs because they are, although supplementary to the academic day, more of a recreation setting. So we do need to look at how to financially justify our safe budget with the social distancing requirements of a 1-to-5 ratio as they stand currently. That again is a concern as most of our after school programs currently run at a 1-to-15 up to a 1-to-20 ratio. Also, EMDC is possibly exempt from this because they are CYFD licensed as an essential business as a childcare rather than a recreation or after school program. We are able to meet the needs of that program with the social distancing and the ratios. The only issue there would be the type of format that staff return and what their daycare needs would be. So if staff were to work remotely 100%, we would need to look at what children would be enrolling, what their recommendations would be in terms of care that they needed, and then also what we would need in terms of our budget to be functioning. Again, both SAFE and EMDC are fully funded through tuition. They are not subsidized through the district or any other funds. They are just tuition based. So that's something that we would need to look at predicting what our enrollment would be depending on the format of the school day for the fall. Another thing to look at is with the CARES Act funding, at what point we're able to look at programs as not necessarily supplemental, but essential to families, especially those folks providing childcare to our school staff, our custodians, our transportation, our teachers, and folks who are on campus, as well as our community members. So looking at the spaces we would be able to use, what our safe portables may be something that are absorbed into the school day if there's any type of staggered instruction, but we would also need to look at what space and capacity we would have available for both those before and after school periods and what that would look like if there were to be hour changes or instructional day changes. Again, staff are paid 100% through tuition, so we would need to be able to set fees that would be obviously modified based on the COVID closures and adjustments to the fall for the 2020-2021 school year. That's something that we do pre-register, and we have a pretty consistent enrollment, but again, that would probably fluctuate depending on parent needs, if they're working outside of the home, if they're working remotely, if they're not working any longer, and what their other children at middle and high school level, what their needs are. So we would definitely have a change in terms of our enrollment and our student needs. We would also need to look at how we justify care for our staff, because of course our community makes up about 90% of our enrollment for SAFE. But if we have teachers working on full contract days in person for any type of staggered days, what does that look like if their own children aren't necessarily attending a full 100% instruction in person? That's something that we would definitely need to consider as essential to those folks as well. Another consideration that is special for SAFE, EMDC is not in this category because we do require everybody to be 18 to have graduated high school and to be cleared through CYFD with a background check. But for SAFE, we do employ about 30% of our staff through our high schools within the district. And with that, we would have to look at how to supplement that staffing need, as we would have students that were perhaps not able to attend our schools because they're at the high school level. If they're doing school remotely, it would be very difficult to justify employing them if they're not able to be on campus for instruction, but we would allow it for work. That would be a conflict to look at. And if we were to have a decrease in staffing, those staff are hired year to year. So that would be the first piece we would look at to eliminate new hiring rather than cutting current hires. The next slide, please, Jane. So how would we provide care to staff and safe for students? Again, continued, we would look at assigning our coordinators who, again, are contracted staff. They are contracted similar to a teacher contract on a 7.5-hour workday. And with that, we would look at how to perhaps stagger or flex those hours so that if there was a change in the instructional day, we can modify our programs readily for that. It's not something where we have staff that can only work that 6:45 to 9 and that 3:30 to 6 p.m. We would be able to adjust our hourly staff to the needs of after-school care based on what the instructional day would look like. Again, CDC is suggesting no outside entities. Those are things that we call vendors. We do work with vendors such as Explora, Nuclear Museum. We have Wildlife Federation, other third parties that come in to supplement our programs to provide that enrichment. And that is something that we would not only have to consider, but most likely be required to eliminate, at least for this upcoming school year, just because it does get difficult to regulate individuals who come in and out of our programs and any type of exposure. The other issue with that piece of it too is if we're looking at modified budgets and enrollments, we would want to consolidate that funding directly towards providing care first and foremost before providing those outside entities. Offset of revenue would have to be looked at. Let's say that there was no in-person, right? Let's say the state goes to that format of complete remote instruction. We would really have to go back to the drawing board on that to see how we maintain those contract staff while not being able to provide care. But again, that's a worst case scenario ideally. We do have Enchanted Mesa, which is 100% Rio Rancho Public School staff. So that is definitely impacted with the COVID-19 closures. Again, we closed down our center with the exception to emergency care for first responders. So we would need to look at how we would structure our tuition requirements for staff using the daycare if they are in fact still on contract but working remotely and still needing that care. Looking again, I'll refer back to that NMAA guidance that applies to our after-school programs as a recreation type format. We would have the option of pods of students. So for space, if we're using a gym, cafeteria, or a larger space, we would be able to utilize those spaces. But the issue again is that staffing of a 1-to-5 ratio becomes very financially difficult. Nothing's impossible. I wouldn't want to assume that. I think we can work with a lot of things, but that 1-to-5 ratio in terms of cost effectiveness for both our community families, and then if staff are then required to use a program due to their working in person while students aren't in school, we would need to consider that greatly. And again, just to end on that note, again, PPE processes, things like that, temperature, all of those would apply to us as they would athletics and the academic day. But again, we can adjust. So once we have those guidelines for an instructional day format and what the hours will look like, we'll be able to adjust programs to provide care for those in the highest need, of course, staff and community kiddos who definitely need that care. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. The next slide is how have we updated discipline matrix for distance learning. So we have gone ahead and had the committees work in the spring on our discipline matrices for the next year as if we were in our normal setting per se. However, when we get down to the 5th bullet, I'll discuss that a little bit. But we had some recommendations to move students to a new class on one-on-one online where you could do that and send recordings and not let them participate in the live period, but still participate. Because if there are things happening, we have to continue to write those referrals and contact parents and recording it in PowerSchool as we normally would. We've also dealt with some password switching, so changing passwords and monitoring access closely with approved consequences if incidents occurred. Consider looking at behavior intervention plans and 504 accommodations online as digital. Consider the use of a virtual ISS that is more productive and interactive and engaged. Some students may need to physically attend school though, due to safety or to be more productive. And creating an addendum and add language to the discipline matrix that I just had previously talked about, that we have our current one and it has been updated, but looking at doing an addendum and creating a subcommittee that would be representative of our schools and certain specific people from district office, so that we can make sure that we're really addressing that distance learning for if there is a discipline issue, but we need to know that plan first before we can do that. And is it possible for a student to be taken to a due process hearing for behavior during this time if something were to occur that was really something that fell to a level 3 on the discipline matrix? The next slide, please. So the next couple slides are information that you've already heard, but we're kind of putting it together because it asked what are the budget implications for the team's proposal and possibilities for cost savings. I have to say, I do not see, it's very hard to say there would be cost savings. So that is a difficult one to be able to say that we would be able to do that. Transportation budget has always been an issue. And as you saw from the numbers, what Lynn Carl had given, we're talking over $3 million of additional funds to be able to do some type of plan to be able to have students on buses and temperatures and cleaning. We will still need additional funding if we do some type of A to B schedule. If there is an AM PM schedule, buses will be running all day and there would be significant overtime, increased fuel costs, increased mileage, wear and tear on the buses. Transportation is also anticipating the requirement to disinfect the buses as she shared. We would also incur costs for masks for the drivers and attendants. And I know, again, we've talked about the CARES Act and that funding, but where does that come from? And then we also had a suggestion, and if that would be a cost, to have hotspots on our buses throughout the district. The next slide, please. And other potential costs, the SEL curriculum that we suggested, which does not have to be ripple effects, but that one is $146,000 for all of our students. It comes down to about $8.50 a student. Additional funds to pay for safe and Enchanted Mesa daycare programs, if that is allowed with the CARE Act. But what does that look like for essential employees? Any additional medical equipment for the nurse's office, temperature scanners, isolation room, which we want to call the care room, PPE equipment, et cetera, disinfectants, increasing the EAP employee assistance program through the Human Resources Department for our staff to help them through this time, and support our alternative education setting and our reframe programs for at-risk to attend, since there's a smaller number of students who attend and we can social distance with a better success rate. The next slide, please. So Larry Chavez is now going to present this slide, probably rather quickly because you've already heard this, but we did capture and update it based on what he presented to you. So Larry, I'll let you go through this rather quickly, just because I know they know all of this information, but we wanted to recap it because it was one of the questions asked of the task force. Thank you, Larry.
All right, thank you, Tana. Good evening, Madam President Galbraith, Superintendent Dr. Cleveland, and members of the Rio Rancho Public Schools Board of Education. I presented the Phase 1 guidelines on June 8th, so I will not go into great detail as it will be repetitive from last Monday. The two big questions: when can teams start meeting again? And are we going to have fall sports? Those are captured in the first two bullets. Rio Rancho Public Schools athletics now can tentatively resume practices within the current NMAA Phase 1 guidelines beginning July 6th. This was based on the school board decision made on Monday, June the 8th. Fall sports. NMAA Executive Director Sally Marcus is hopeful for fall sports. She is working closely with the governor's office and the PED office. They're working to stay within the governor's guidelines. This will work in conjunction with the reopening of schools, and there will be plenty of information to come in the future. A quick review of the following. The NMAA has decided all physicals from last year will suffice unless there is an injury that occurred recently or there was a COVID-19 sickness. I reviewed this in detail on Monday, June the 8th. Coaches working with any student athlete will need a current up-to-date COVID-19 test. That test will have needed to occur after June 29th. We've been talking about workout pods. Workout pods are a 5-to-1 ratio. In the gym, we could have 2 to 3 pods at any one time. On the fields, 4 to 5. Pods cannot mix or work with other staff or pod members. There's no sharing of equipment of any kind. Coaches must wear a mask at all times. Students do not have to have a mask during the workout, but the student athletes must wear the mask from their car to the workout area. Locker rooms and water fountains are off limits. Student athletes must arrive dressed for the workout and supply their own water and water bottle. The one change, though, weight rooms. As of June 11th, weight rooms may be used with limitations on spotters, the amount to be lifted, and the disinfecting and sanitizing of the area. This does not really affect the Rio Rancho Public Schools as we are not beginning until July the 6th. At that time, the weight room may be utilized and there could be many more changes made in the next 4 weeks as this is an ever-changing fluid situation. We can go on to the next one.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay.
Okay, so what is the status of co-curricular and after-hours activities in buildings? This is also directed by NMAA Athletics, and we know that ratio of being 1 to 5, and students being assigned to one adult and rotating. Clubs could be done virtually through Meets, and those activities, FFA, speech and debate, et cetera, those activities that have national competitions virtually may begin to register and prepare. And then also the current CDC guidelines, which we mentioned previously, suggest no outside agencies or vendors in buildings at this time. The next slide, please. So I think it was important to share this as a parent perspective from a parent on our committee, as well as being a part of the community, kind of had a dual role, very thoughtful and participated in all of our meetings. And he had talked about that a traditional model for him is by far the best, just because of course we all want everything to go back to normal, right? We want everybody to go back to their normal schedule in the morning and get there when they need to and be at school all day, then get on the bus or pick them up. And so I think that's what a lot of people are hoping for. But a blended learning is most difficult for dual working households and scheduling. I believe many families did get into a routine. It took them a while, but they got into a routine. And that was one of the things that he had talked about. Once they got into the routine, then it was working, but it wouldn't have been their ideal routine. And fully digital learning possibly allows parents to choose a digital option. If transportation is an issue or there's a fear that a school is not a safe place for their children, then they can choose that. And if parents choose fully digital learning, then they have to agree to partner with the schools to have their children participate through online learning. And then the last bullet was really about, for the smaller percentage of families needing assistance, maybe something else can be worked out, an alternative plan, working with the counselors, administration. And what does that look like for that family to keep them in school and keep them connected during this time? So I believe those are all of our slides and answering our questions tonight as a task force team. And so I will stand for any questions as well as anyone else who presented tonight.
Okay, thank you so much, Tana. That was very, very good. Lots of good information. We're going to go ahead and start with Board Member Coleman. Do you have some questions? And I know some of these are your passions, so I thought we'd start with you.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, and I'm guessing that the difference between the care room and the isolation room, are we just changing the name so it doesn't sound so dressed? I mean, I'm just curious the need to do that.
So I believe Sal and his task force will speak more to that. And that's why I didn't go into a deeper conversation about that, because that is the area, one of the areas that he actually was tasked with discussing with his team. So he's going to give you a lot more detailed information, but you are correct. We changed it to the care room instead of the isolation room because we felt like that sounded probably not the best in a situation with our children, especially our younger children. But I know Sal is going to address that in his presentation.
Okay. And I think what will be helpful for me is when I know that we're looking at a program to deal with the social emotional support of our students virtually. I think my question is really where this falls as far as budget with what programs we're not able to administer. And I think that that will be something that I'd like to go ahead and just be able to see at some point is what we're able to do, what we're not able to do, and what we're doing, what we're saving when we make those changes. So, and that's more of a statement. So my next question actually would be for Larry Chavez. Now, when we return to play, are the athletes, student athletes, practicing or working out on the weekends?
When it comes down to the weekends and we return on July the 6th, they can work out on the weekends. There is nothing set against it. There's not a limitation of weekly hours. So if a coach would like to work on a Saturday, they can work out on a Saturday. As in the past, most camps were Friday and Saturday. So that we don't have a limitation on Saturdays.
And is that, would that have been the case if we had started June 15th also?
Correct.
Okay. And is that, when it comes to budget and everything, are we taking that into account in having to have students on campus and extra expense for that?
There's really not an extra expense to that, as we have all the sanitation, disinfecting items already on campus. The coaches will already have their thermometers, as those have been passed out to the athletic directors. So there really is not an additional cost.
Okay. And those are all the questions I have. So thank you. Thank you to the committee. A lot of work.
Thank you, Board Member Coleman. Catherine Cullen.
Sorry, I have to unmute. So I just had a quick question. Can you review the flu shot? Why we can't request it mandatory, but why were we really looking at providing the flu shot or getting?
So, so every year we do provide flu shots to our students and to our staff. And it's something that we do across the state. They do in all of the districts. And it's something that the Department of Health pushes and wants districts to do as well. And so we do it as well. Nobody has to get one. Parents have to sign off. They have to agree to it. They have to fill out a form. And then this last year, they ended the program through the Department of Health. And so then we worked with Albertsons to be able to get that going. And so they came in and gave those flu shots with the same type of parent permissions, and we had a contract with them. And so that's what those flu shots are. We've done that for years, and we just switched to Albertsons this last year.
Okay.
Let me add one part to that, Catherine, to answer your question. The reason that we are looking at it and pushing it is coming from the medical professionals in this community. And for two reasons. One is they believe that they might give a little bit of protection, probably not a lot, but it is an antiviral. The second, though more importantly, is that it's very hard in the early stages to diagnose between flu and COVID. And so if you don't get flu, they're not having to look at you as an individual and say, well, do we think you have the flu or do we think you have COVID? So during the flu season, they're hoping as many people as possibly will get the flu shot so that they don't get flu, they don't have to be checked for the flu. The other is if you have a really bad case of the flu and we see the second wave coming when COVID-19, you will be taking hospital beds away from people who may need it for COVID. So they're just saying if you never had a flu shot ever, this would be the year to have one unless you have an adverse medical condition, because it may, the worst scenario that they can look at in the medical community right now is that we will have a bad flu epidemic and we will have the second wave of COVID-19 at the same time. And it will completely overwhelm our medical facilities. So that's why we can't require it. And they are planning to do quite a push, I think, in terms of community service ads to get people to try to get the flu shot. Because if everybody in the hospital and ICU has COVID-19, but you're one of those people that looks like they're going to die from the flu, there wouldn't be a place for you there. So that's the worst case scenario, is a bad flu epidemic this year and a second wave of COVID. And so they're just pleading with people to get their flu shots. So we're going to make a real push encouraging people to do it. Not that they have to or that we can make them do it, but that it would be in everybody's best interest for them, in fact, to do it. And then my last comment is that staff will have doubled indemnity this year. You know, if you have a bad flu epidemic and you have COVID resurgence, then our staff will have double the chance of ended up with something that will pull them out of our schools and our classrooms. So that's where that discussion is coming from, is from the medical community, not from the educational academic community.
Well, my understanding, this is Board Member Cullen, my understanding is that the flu vaccine does not guarantee you don't get the flu during the season, because it only is for certain strains. Is that correct? Because you're saying that they don't have to check for a flu if you got the flu vaccine, but my always understanding is that there's different strains.
There is last year a new flu shot that came out late in the season. And they say that it's the best flu shot that has ever been developed, and that it will cover several versions of the flu. And so it's the super powerful flu shot, I guess, and that it should cover more and should be far more effective, kind of like the second wave of shingle shots, far more effective than the first. And so they believe that this super flu shot, last spring I went in to get it, and they told me that it was completely sold out. They could give me the old one, but hopefully, or say get in line early, because this is so much more effective than previous flu shots have been.
Okay, thank you. I was just kind of trying to figure out the whole flu shot thing. Thank you. No other questions.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Cullen. Vice President Morgan, you have any questions, comments?
Yeah, I just had a question on the budget. I think it's slide 16. And you had purchase or lease the temperature check pads for $121,600. How many is that? Is that for each of the hiring attendant or for the bus driver? It doesn't say how many down there.
That would actually be for all of our buses. That's for 64 buses. We have 43 large buses as well as 21 special needs buses.
Okay. Now the other question I have with that is, we were just presented earlier today. I think these are the same devices that we were presenting and talked about earlier today. I would assume that these devices is separate from the devices, the 71 that we were looking at earlier today. Is that correct?
That I'm not sure. I don't know which ones you were looking at today. I had just received some information from Sal Maniaci as well as Dr. Cleveland regarding these iPad type of temperature devices. Okay. And I have not received the information yet to even look at them and see how they are. So I'm not prepared to answer that if they're the same.
So I see a few.
I think I can answer that. We're ordering them, and so is APS. And yes, they would take the place of the others if we were to purchase them. So instead of having the bus attendant out scanning, they would have the stand out, and the student would go by, and but you would still have to have a bus attendant to sit a ways away to make sure every student went through. But you don't need both. You would choose one or the other.
Okay.
So Dr. Cleveland, just to clarify on that one, so are these are different devices than what we talked about in Finance Committee, or they're the same devices that we would order additional, we'd order an additional 71 for the buses? Is that correct?
I would like to defer that to Mike and Sal on what, maybe it would be good again to go over if we do the original, what all does it cover?
Madam President, members of the school board, Dr. Cleveland, the issues or the tablet that was presented today is for the school sites, not for the school buses. So, you know, I think we have a number of scenarios. One, we would take the temperature before the student got on the bus, and then also when the student arrived at school, or we would just take the temperature when the student arrived at school, or we would just take the temperature when the student arrived on the bus. The problem with taking the temperature at the bus is there is a significant issue, and that is if a student had a temperature at the bus stop, what do we do then with that student? Whereas if we take their temperature and they have a temperature inside the school, we would have the resources to take care of that student. So those are some of the issues that, you know, we still haven't vetted out yet.
You would also have the other side of that is you have a child with a high temperature. And we know this is one of the most infectious diseases we have seen in a long, long time. And so you put the student that's sick on the bus and they stay on the bus 45 minutes, which some of our students do. Probably every single student will be, will have an increased chance of picking it up. So yes, there are some challenges still to work out with that process. But if you had the scanner, you wouldn't, I may have misunderstood the question. If you had the scanner for the bus, you would not need a separate temperature, a thermometer. If you could do one or the other. The other thing in which Mike's right, when you get to school, you have a better ability to put a student in a care room or whatever there's going to be a couple of big questions with regards to that. And one is who's going to be in that care room and who wants to be in that care room. The other situation is that if you could scan them at the bus, then when they get to school, they can enter another door, which most of our kids on buses do anyway. And they would not have to be scanned again. So that would cut down the time for students to get into the building. If I were to project what I think most parents that we're going to hear a lot from them is the time it's going to take to get students into the building, if in fact we have to scan every child. If we don't, and they don't require that, then a lot of that issue will go away. Then it would be up to the local district to decide if they wanted to do that or not. But if we end up being required, we just, I think Sal did a test for how long it takes to do the handheld. And he can probably, if he remembers how much time it took, if you did every child, how long, to get them in the building. We're going to hear from parents that their kids are outside when it starts to get colder. That can really be a problem to try to move it up. So I know some of the districts that are using these scanners plan to not do a second check at the school site and to have them enter another door, and will cut down the processing time in the morning for students who would arrive on campus.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Sal, did you want to add anything to that? I saw you.
Yeah, if I could, Madam President, Dr. Cleveland, and members of the board, the tablet, the information that was sent to Lynn Carl is the same tablet that we talked about in the Finance Committee meeting earlier this evening. That tablet has the capability of being a handheld device. The attendant on the bus could exit the bus, put that device out there, maintain a reasonable distance from the attendant to the student, and let each student board the bus and get a temperature reading. And Dr. Cleveland had mentioned in the Finance Committee meeting that does serve, it serves a couple of purposes. One is it is a screening process prior to kids getting on the bus and being within close proximity to each other. And then the other issue that it could assist in is that it said we could have a separate exit that's designated just for students who rode the bus. And that would alleviate them from having to be screened when they get to their designated school. So it has a couple of advantages by being done that way. That number of buses that Ms. Carl was speaking about is in addition to the 71 that we discussed during the Finance Committee meeting earlier. And one of the things I failed to mention during the Finance Committee meeting, if I just a couple minutes just to expand on, is that the company that manufactures this device is OneScreen, and is also the same company that we get our smart interactive boards from. So we have a level of comfort with this company. We've been doing business with them for quite some time. We're incredibly happy with the products they provide in the classroom. And so like I said, and as we were dealing with this company, I just developed kind of a level of comfort with them. They're very accommodating. We talked about the tablets that we would use maybe in the transportation setting. And listen, things happen, and what I wanted coming from my law enforcement background, I thought, because we used the Panasonic Toughbooks. It's a ruggedized laptop. You can drop it, you could kick it. I think you could run over with a car. I think it would still work. So we talked to the representatives from OneScreen and said, listen, can you ruggedize this? Can you make something like with a rubber coating around it so if it gets dropped, is it still serviceable? And they were very accommodating, and they're looking into those things for us. So, so I'm pretty optimistic that that whatever application we want to use this tablet for, they can tailor it for our needs.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Go ahead, President Morgan. You got more?
I do. So, Dr. Cleveland just indicated that that they would prefer to take the kids' temperature at school. I think Mike mentioned this. That way, if there's an issue, they got support there. So if I'm looking at this budget, if we decide to do that, there's about 3 or 4 different things on here that we can eliminate from this budget if we decide not to get these devices for the buses. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. When I made that spreadsheet, it is really worst case scenario on every topic there.
All right. Okay. Hey, I'm good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Vice President Morgan. Secretary Scott.
Yes, I think this may be covered in the next section, but so often our teachers are the first ones to identify child abuse, and I'm wondering how this is going to be addressed in this new environment.
So, yes, we actually had some incidents that occurred during the spring, and they were still submitted as they usually were because the CYFD, at least through our district, we submit online now. So any type of suspected abuse or anything that's going on with a student or a family can still be sent in the same capacity. And we also continued our mental health referrals, which we had several that came through during that time as well, and they're all online. And so as counselors were meeting with families, talking with students and checking in daily, they were still able to spot possible situations that might be going on that didn't seem right.
How are you able to spot them?
So basically, when they were speaking, they would speak with students or families. I think it's just a professional opinion of a counselor or a social worker or our ASAC counselor. If they see something going on that doesn't seem right, or if the student's not checking in, or if they get information. I mean, I think there's lots of different scenarios, and I can't speak specifically to those because some of those are confidential. But there are things that counselors are able to see, and there are things that they know just with their training what to look for. And so it can be done. Is it is as perfect, and I don't want to say it's perfect, but is it as good as it is when you're on a school campus and you're actually seeing one? Probably not. But I think that's why it's so important to check in every single day and to make sure we have some type of program, we have some type of constant connection, and so that we can see if there's something going on in the home that we need to help the family and the student with.
Thank you. President Galbraith, I have no more questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Secretary Scott. Any further questions that were generated? Yes, Lynn Coleman.
Board Member Coleman. I have two questions, two different areas. The first, if I can address to Tana. Tana, are you working with, I know that there was the program and I thought that you were working with it after the presentation that aligned us with kind of the program with the first responders or the emergency responders, and I can't remember the name of it. Is it Handle with Care?
Oh, yes. So Handle with Care has been with our crisis response team from the district that we're working on. And that was one of the areas that we were going to start working on for this fall. And so there's a social worker that I'm working with, and she's going to start taking the lead on that and working with me. And we're going to move forward with that. It's just going to take a little bit of time just because of the situation. But that was where we were in the spring to move forward with the Handle with Care, which is a national program. And so we have all intentions to move forward with that.
And that might address a little bit of what Secretary Scott had concerns about, because that might be one way to identify situations.
Correct, because correct, because you work with agencies to make sure that everybody's on the same team and everybody knows what's going on.
So that would be something in the future. So, but I just know that that is a potential for that. And then the other has to do with, I wanted to go back, and this is for the thermometer earth temperature readers that we had the presentation on in the budget committee. So my question is, the price, the amount that we saw, the dollar amount, does that include the rugged cases? And if we were told that you're working with them, then I would assume that we don't have the full pricing yet.
Board Member Coleman, Madam President, that is correct. Those additions to the tablet have not been calculated because those prices are unknown at this time. I'm hoping it's something that is an add-on, that if we had the tablets, so we could add that on as soon as those things become available.
what else then, in addition to the rugged case, what else are you looking at including with that, with the temperature checks, the pads, the tablets?
What we talked about in the finance committee, Board Member Coleman, is the stands, which are already included in the price. That again, it's a stand that makes that device portable. For when we look at, for this presentation, for the bus application, it would need any additional item. It would need a power supply. It would plug into the cigarette lighter or an accessory port of a school bus, but that is included with the device and there's no additional charge for that.
Okay, but then the case would be the extra, right?
That is correct.
And is that just for the buses?
I would say just for the buses, ma'am, because the tablets that would be used at the facilities and schools are hard mounted on a very rugged, heavy 4-foot stand. I couldn't see that getting knocked over.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the board that were? Tana, did you want to give any additional thoughts at the end here? And I'll ask Dr. Cleveland too.
I think really, just as I said at the beginning, that once we know what direction we're going as a district, we're ready to jump in and create subcommittees, polling counselors, social workers, those from the schools, and really get going as to what we can actually do. We are ready and in anticipation to get that done.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And Dr. Cleveland, did you want to add anything?
I just want to thank the committee. It was a great group. They worked hours. They met numerous times. They tried really hard to cover all the questions that they were asked to cover. And so I just wanted to say thank you for the hard work that everybody put in on that. And I think we've got some good information to build on.
I agree. Thank you so much. We appreciate all the hard work. When I read through these different presentations, I'm in awe of everything that you guys are going through and trying to come up with. So thank you so much for your presentation, and everyone who presented with you. We appreciate it. Okay, we will move on to our next presentation, the Task Force on Health and Safety. And this will be Sal. I say your name wrong, I think, and it's embarrassing because I'm Italian, but say your last name for me. So Sal
Maniaci.
Maniaci. And I've been doing Italian family history recently too, so it's doubly embarrassing.
It's not the easiest, that's for sure.
All right, it's all you. Thank you.
All right, great. Jane, if you could put up my presentation, please. Thank you very much. All right. Hope we can move to the next slide. So first, I want to make a couple of statements, and I want to thank all the teams that have presented prior to me because they've addressed so many issues in great detail and specificity that it kind of backs up a lot of the information that I'm going to present to everybody tonight. My team members were outstanding. My cabinet representative was Mike Baker, Chief Operations Officer, and then our members were Vicki McCarty from Cleveland High School, Alicia Baines from Cielo Azul, Mike Chavez, who is the Director of Human Resources, was a great resource for us, Todd Doss from Facilities, Linda Kitts from Rio Rancho Middle School, Mike Madrid, the Director of Finance, who was great to have with us, especially as we look at acquiring goods and services for getting us through this next school year. Rich Misback brought a lot to the table, basically with his human resources experience and his prior law enforcement experience. My director, Mike Padilla, Christine Prescott from Vista Grande Elementary, Joe Sanchez. Can't thank Joe enough. She was integral in us getting where we are today. I want to thank Tana, being the chair of her committee, was a big help to me and mine. And then our community members, we ended up having 3. I wanted one from each discipline, so I asked Ken Lilly, who's a captain for Rancho Police Department, to be a member, Teresa Greeno, who's the emergency manager for the city of Rio Rancho, and then finally James DiFilippo, who is a longtime family friend, who's the deputy chief at Rio Rancho Fire Department. And what was great about having these 3 on our team as community members was not only did they give their input and expertise on their disciplines, but also they added to the team as far as the parent perspective, which I really appreciated. So they kind of served a dual role for us. Next slide, Gene. Thank you. We had 5 meetings. There's the dates. Next slide. So I'm going to try to make this presentation just as quick and efficient as I can. I know you guys have a lot on the agenda. So we had 14 questions that were to be addressed. And the first one was to talk about rapid response teams for referral, tracing, and isolation of staff or students with symptoms or diagnoses of COVID-19. And I know Tana had mentioned the care room, isolation room. And yeah, we wanted to come up with a different term rather than isolation room. I didn't like that word at all. I thought it was just inappropriate for the school setting. So the rapid response team was something that the team thought about, and we figured that needed to be a team that consisted of different people from the school setting, an assistant principal or a designee, a nurse or nurse assistant, and a security officer. And what this team would do is they would be in the area of the entry points where we would be scanning temperatures with whatever device we decide to go with. I hope it's the tablet that we discussed earlier. And monitor the input of students and staff. And then when we have a student or a staff member that has a temperature, we would have a process in place that would have a verification to it. What do we do once somebody comes in with a temperature of higher than the designated threshold? What actions do we take after that? And we would develop a protocol to deal with that. And there would be a verification process. Like I said, we would designate a care room. It's a location that's separate from the nurse's office, and it's utilized by students or even a staff member, if need be, that display symptoms of COVID-19. The care room would need to be staffed with either a school nurse or a substitute school nurse, and having great conversations with Joe Sanchez. She really liked the idea of using a substitute school nurse because it's additional staff member that can be in addition to the nurse. And maybe some of the smaller schools we get by having a nurse staff that room, but I really think it's imperative that we have an additional certified person working that care room. What we would do is for the tracing and dealing with students and staff members is if we had a staff member that arrived at a Rio Rancho Public Schools facility that were present with a fever or other known COVID-19 symptoms, they would be immediately sent home and follow the established guidelines. Working with Mike Chavez at HR, we talked in great length about, how important it would be to have that written, notified, established protocol so that staff members know if they go to work, they show up at work, they have a fever and they're displaying other COVID-19 symptoms, that diagnosis has been kind of verified, then they need to go home and they have guidelines that they need to follow. Jane? Students that arrive at Rio Rancho Public Schools facility and present a fever or known symptoms of COVID-19 and have a temperature of 100 degrees or higher, immediately will be given a face covering and gloves and be escorted to the designated care room. So at this point, we're isolating that student from other students. We're giving them personal protective equipment that if they are infected with, or if they have COVID-19, the chances of them spreading it are greatly reduced. And then we're going to contact the parent or guardian immediately and have them pick up their students. We did talk about, one of the nice things about having the principals on my team was we really got firsthand information of what happens in a normal environment when a student needs to be picked up from school. Sometimes it could be 3-4 hours before the parent or guardian arrives. And I think that's what really necessitates having these care rooms, is that you could be in a situation where you have a student that may be infected with COVID-19 that may have to be in our care for an extended period of time. It could be 4 hours, 5 hours, or it could be 30 minutes. We want to notify the Department of Health and provide them all the student staff information so they're able to trace contacts of the person testing positive. Again, that's something that we would look into further to make sure we establish the proper protocol to take that situation and get it taken care of. And then it would be necessary to hire assistants or substitute nurses to deal with the care rooms. Next slide, Jane. Coordination with other government agencies for maximizing limited resources. This is another question that was posed to us. One of the things that I really enjoyed having the emergency manager with the city of Rio Rancho on our team is that it's amazing the amount of information that she was able to provide to us. So I think it would be imperative that we continue to have that ongoing communication. I would like to see monthly meetings with members of my team and the emergency manager to make sure that we are up to date with all the latest information they receive, additional resources they have available, and any information that we can use to keep our students and staff safe. I think it's important that we establish, or my team thought it was very important that we establish a contact at the New Mexico Department of Health. I can tell you that all my years working in the police department and law enforcement, nothing's worse than trying to get somebody to give you assistance and you don't know who the person is to go to. We would try to have that person established and known before we even get started, so that if we had a situation that arose, we know immediately who to contact and get the ball rolling in that area. Maintaining these communications will allow us to stay up to date and frequently changing health orders. One thing I've noticed since the onset of COVID-19 is it's a very fluid situation. It's dynamic and it's ever changing. So we would need to make sure that we do what we need to do to keep the information flow current. And continue to maintain communications with our partners at the Rio Rancho Police Department and the Rio Rancho Fire Department. As I go further on in my presentation, we're going to talk about hypochlorous acid, which is something I've never heard of before, but it seems to be a pretty impressive product. Next slide, Jane. So the third question was strategies that encourage the district to be flexible so that we can quickly shift to alternate COVID-19 plans when warranted or required by the state. I think I touched on that just a few minutes ago. This virus is just ever changing, and the way that the Department of Health gives us direction to deal with it is also changing frequently. So I think it's important that we have a team that's controlled by the Office of Communications and Strategies that works closely with the Department of Health and the Department of Education, so that as that information becomes available, it's transmitted to cabinet, and from cabinet it gets disseminated to students, staff, and parents. Jane? The fourth question, safety training for staff, students, and families on ways to combat or reduce COVID-19 outbreaks. There's been a tremendous amount of information. Some of it's been debatable, some of it hasn't been. But I think it's important, and the team thinks it's important, that all staff members are required to complete safe school training on COVID-19. I went ahead and took the COVID-19 safe school training. I thought it was informative. I thought it was a great start to start that mindset of how we mitigate the risks of getting the disease or transmitting the disease. I believe that the Office of Strategy and Engagement could create a link similar to Safe Schools that parents, volunteers, and contractors could watch. And we would require those people to complete that training before they could enter a Rio Rancho Public Schools facility. I don't think that's a difficult thing to track. I think we have great people in our IT department that can develop a way that, just like it is at Safe Schools, it runs a report of who attended that training. If a contractor for one of our companies that does work for our schools shows up at a school, we should be able to access that database and say, okay, yeah, this individual attended that training, and as long as they have the proper PPE and the proper screening, they can come in and do work. And it would probably be on an emergency type situation because we don't want additional people in our schools. Hygiene and disinfection guidelines should be posted in various locations throughout all schools and Rio Rancho Public Schools facilities. And the district may use Parent University to have participative virtual training, which will allow parent input. I've been fortunate enough since I've been with the school district to participate in Parent University. I think it's a great tool. I've even met some of our board members there, and I think it's a great way for us to have that interactive communication with parents and students and talk about ways to mitigate this virus. Jane? So this is the big one, building entry protocols for screening of virus symptoms, example given temperature scans, automatic rejection if the fever is present. So the common denominator seems to be the student's or staff person's temperature. Student temperatures can be checked using a non-contact thermometer as they get on each bus each day. This will require a driver's assistant. I know Lynn Carl talked a lot about this, and I spoke a little bit about the tablet on the bus. I think it's a good idea. I like the fact that, and again, I know there was some debate about the facial recognition component of this tablet. Before Mr. Dworsky left, I made certain that function can be absolutely disabled on that tablet. So it's something that we can definitely look into in the future. If the board feels that it's an option that they don't want, it never has to be turned on. But from the standpoint of accountability of students getting on the bus, think how valuable that tablet becomes when the student gets on the bus. It registers that student as being present on that bus, and it's just a great way of keeping track of the students as they utilize our transportation services. The The information that's registered on that tablet, once it gets to the bus depot, would be automatically downloaded as soon as it has access to the network. So it's a great way of keeping track of our students. Granted, the transportation department would be saddled with developing a protocol that outlines procedures when students attempting to enter the bus display symptoms of COVID-19. There's been talk about, is it best to have that screening done only at school? I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both methods. I think it'd be the first line of defense really is that bus. You know, we have these kids getting on the bus, students getting on the bus, and it would be nice to know that we have a screening process prior to them getting within close proximity to each other. School nurses and health assistants can utilize no-contact thermometers to obtain temperatures of staff and students when they arrive at school during the school day. These no-touch thermometers will be used as a supplement to the Go Safe tablets. Working with Jo, she definitely believes that from her experience on the nursing side, that you need to have these no-touch thermometers to use, like I said, the verification process if we have a student or staff member that does display a temperature on the Go Safe tablet. And I think that there are other uses for them in the classroom itself. Jane? Deploy tablets that can measure a person's temperature. We talked in great detail about that. This is the kind of the deployment schedule that I came up with. I put together a formula. I'm not going to bore you with the formula, but there was a method behind the way I came up with these numbers. So we'll go through there. At Cleveland, at the high schools, we believe that 6 tablets each. The 2 non-comprehensive high schools, 2 tablets each. The middle schools, 4 tablets each. Jane? And then in the elementary schools, 3 tablets each. And the nice thing about these tablets is that they're so portable that if we would have a situation where one school maybe only needed 2, but another school needed 4, they're deployable in that fashion. So they're just a great device and very manipulable. That's the new Shining Stars, 3 tablets, and then for district office and the warehouse, an additional 3 tablets. Next slide, Jane. Procedures for sanitizing hands before entering and identifying the sanitary protocols required during the day. Hand washing before breakfast and lunch. One of the things I can tell you that has changed my life dramatically since COVID-19 is I seem to wash my hands probably like 20 times a day. So I think it's important that we have standardized signs that are age appropriate placed throughout the schools, showing where the nearest dispensers are for sanitation. Procedures signs shall be placed at bathrooms showing proper hand washing. Signs that use pictures shall also be utilized for non-reading students. And I want to thank my elementary school principals for that guidance. The Rio Rancho Fire Department is utilizing a disinfectant called hypochlorous acid. I'd never heard of this product before the team was comprised. So HOCl is approved by both the CDC and the FDA in killing the coronavirus and noroviruses. The solution is 100 times stronger than bleach, but safe to aerosol and poses no contact threats to handlers. This has been a very popular disinfectant in wrestling gyms for years in defeating bacteria and viruses. So it's not a new product. It's actually a product that's been around forever. It's been used in a lot of athletic facilities. And talking to Deputy Chief DiFilippo, they were so impressed with it after doing all their research that the city actually purchased the equipment to manufacture this product. And I'll have that information for you as we get further on in the presentation. Jane? So restrictions of access to school facilities for everyone except staff and students. How do we manage outside operational and special or student service contractors? So for our typical facility use agreements for outside organizations, we're just not going to allow them. You know, until we get a better handle on what this virus is and how it's progressing, we're just going to eliminate those situations from occurring. First responders and CFD personnel should be granted access to Rio Rancho Public Schools facilities. If practical, they shall be subject to screening prior to entering a facility. In addition, staff and teachers should continue to remain vigilant in their observations when dealing with students for signs of child abuse. I know that question was asked to Tana, and I think Tana gave a great presentation with the program that she's working on. But I can tell you from my 30 years in law enforcement, this is one of the things that I think really troubles me the most, is that when we lose that face-to-face intimate contact with our students, it's going to be difficult to really try to track some of these issues of child abuse. So I would ask that all our personnel be extra vigilant when we deal with kids, our students, whether it be virtually if we have kids coming into school, that we still remain cognizant for looking for these signs and reporting them to CYFD. Every attempt shall be made to arrange all contractors to perform all work when students are not present. And we've done this. I can tell you that we've put together a lot of surveillance improvements in the last year. And when those improvements are being done during school, we do have the contractors working evenings and weekends as to not to disrupt the learning process. And the practice and procedures for visitors, volunteers, staff, and contractors on school property would have to be revised to create new guidelines for how and when individuals can visit our schools and facilities. Again, we would be looking for direction from the state Department of Health and the Department of Education to give us those directions, and we would make our practice and procedure accommodate whatever recommendations they set forth. Jane, thank you. Sanitizing schedules for school buildings, buses, and large areas. How would we sanitize tables after each lunch and sanitizing buses after each tier and restrooms? So working with Todd Doss, the custodians have been working since this first began on sanitizing our school facilities. I think they've got a really good handle on it, but all custodians will have a section of the school to keep disinfected throughout the day. I'm not going to go into it because I know Mark did a great job already, but cafeterias present multiple challenges and efforts to mitigate the risks of spreading COVID-19. There's a lot of options that we could look at when it comes to feeding our students, but school administration may have to add an additional lunch period to provide lunches to all students while maintaining that social distancing. Teachers could assist in disinfecting their classrooms. Custodians would also have additional responsibilities, and that's already been established. And I spoke to the principals that were on my team. I've spoken to teachers, and nobody really had any objection to utilizing the chemical that we decide to use and taking that preventative measure and just going through their classroom before school starts. If students are having their temperature checked throughout the day and are not presenting any other symptoms, is it possible that bathrooms could be sanitized every hour using a pump sprayer with the recommended chemical, and after 5 minutes, the seats and touch points need to be wiped off? And speaking with Deputy Chief DiFilippo about hypochlorous acid, he said that even some of the athletic facilities that use this product, when they spray it on mats and other athletic equipment, they don't even wipe it off. They just let it dry naturally. But I think to be extra cautious about any issues involving our students, I think after 5 minutes, it can just be wiped off any of the seats and the touch points. And I think we're being extra cautious with the protection of our students. Jane? So if it's been determined that a student or staff member used the bathroom and displayed symptoms of COVID-19, that bathroom should be immediately taped off and only be open once the sanitation process has been completed. And then Lynn talked about the school bus issues. School buses will be required to have been disinfected prior to any students boarding the bus. That would go for the tier transfers and any special events. The district should consider the installation of a shield that will protect the bus driver. Lynn talked about that. And then if the tablets were not purchased for the buses, then at the very least, we should have no contact thermometers for each bus. Procedural changes and expectations for fire and active shooter drills. So the Safety and Security Department, we would make sure that we conduct small group fire and active shooter drills. And we would make sure that every student in the school received those drills. It would be a much longer process. We would work with the New Mexico Public Education Department to ensure that we're still in compliance with any statutory requirements that we have for active shooter and fire drills. And then in order to, since we wouldn't have the drills as frequently throughout the year as we do now, what we would do is we would look for videos that have that are a great refresher for our students to watch to keep them up to speed on how these drills are supposed to be conducted. And if we can't find one, we'll make one. We'll make sure that whatever the students need to make sure that they are familiar with how we respond to a fire and active shooter is fresh in their mind. Playground equipment, safety, off limits, and what to do about recesses. So my elementary school principals were very can't think of the word, but they were really, this was very important to them. Playgrounds can be managed by maintaining safe distances and limiting the number of students on each piece of equipment. What we talked about was maybe placing signs or tape on the ground that kind of limits of flow so that we don't have that break in social distancing. And we would ask the custodians be responsible for prior to the students going to recess. And when considering recess, it's important to allow students to be active, which encourages a healthy lifestyle. Students and staff need to remain physically active. And we know that being physically active is one of the best ways to avoid serious consequences associated with COVID-19. Like I said, the principals on our team were just adamant that recess has to happen, that the kids need to be physical, the students need to be physical, and they just feel that's just an important part of their learning day. And then depending on the layout of the school's playground and the number of students, school administration and staff shall create a recess schedule to best comply with state and federal guidelines. It may not be practical to have the typical recess schedule. We may have to spread it out more throughout the day in smaller groups, but nonetheless, they were adamant that it does need to occur. Assurance of circulation flow within buildings across the district. We've seen this in some of our commercial establishments. I believe each grade or section should have their own entrance and exit without moving through the entire building. And arrows should be placed on floors giving clear direction and assist with maintaining separation. Like I said, we've seen that in our commercial establishments, and I think we can certainly implement that in our schools with great success. Maps can be created for students and staff to use that implements the use of same doors whenever practical. School administration and staff can evaluate their schools and create a procedure for implementation. This is, we have a lot of entry and exits in our schools, and we have a very accommodating access control system. And I'm sure that we could utilize that system to control entry and exit to make sure that we limit those points as much as possible. And then bathroom specific areas, so we can, so they're designated by school administration to limit the amount of bathrooms being used. Again, making the disinfection process that much more efficient and effective. So determining what PPE is needed for staff and students. And again, I want to thank Joe for helping me out with this. We've been told that working with Todd Doss that facilities has already procured 500 wall-mounted hand sanitizers along with the chemicals for schools and spray bottles. Microfiber cloths for each classroom, as well as 3,000 three-ply masks for use if needed in front areas that might have parent or guardian walk in who might not have a mask with them. And then staff members who work with students with disabilities and elementary students need to be able to wear clear face shields while teaching. And I never, working with Joe and our principals and other members on our team, they really stress the importance of students being able to see their facial movements, you know, how they're sounding out words. And so we did some research, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but we found these face shields that are very economical. Right now they're readily available, and I think that in these certain circumstances, I think they're absolutely imperative. This is a huge concern if staff members are required to wear face masks all the time. Face shields will allow full visualization of the teacher's face while continuing to provide protection from the COVID-19 virus. And the district needs to consider the accommodations that we need to make that are necessary for special populations that are more susceptible to contracting COVID-19, such as people with underlying health conditions, people that have compromised immune systems, and people that have been predetermined to be in a high-risk category. So the purchase and maintain inventory of adequate supplies of personal protective equipment needed for the day-to-day operations. We would ask that the district determine who is responsible for that, and we would do whatever we can to make sure that is achieved. But like I said, that our team wanted to leave that up to the district. Last slide, Jane. So we identified the budget implications for our proposal and assess the potential for any cost savings. We know this is an expensive endeavor, and Joe Sanchez was kind enough to put together these recommendations for me on the PPE. Goes down, I'm not going to go through each one, but we talked about the surgical face masks. That total comes to $4,245. That's outfitting the care rooms, all the schools. Next slide, Jane. The N95 mask, because there's going to be certain situations where the N95 is going to be required rather than the surgical face mask. And then we talked about the face shields. Those face shields end up being about $2.20 a piece from one of the suppliers that we found. And I think that's a really economical price for a face shield that could be used multiple times. It could be cleaned and used again. So I think it's for what we're trying to do in an educational setting, I think the face shield is important. That comes to $3,900. Gloves, $388. And then the no contact thermometers, again, very important to have as a backup for verification when we talk about mitigating our risk for COVID-19 and making sure that we're doing the right thing with screening. And that comes to $2,543. So the total cost for PPE comes to about $11,893. And that would be for the year. And then the next one, I don't want to spend too much time. We talked about the Go Safe tablets at the Finance Committee. So Jane, next slide. And next slide. So let's talk about the hypochlorous acid. The manufacturing equipment, this is the information I got from Deputy Chief DeFilippo. To produce our own product, this means that we would never be at the mercy of a distributor. We would be able to manufacture ourselves. We can manufacture as little or as much as needed. In order to be in that situation, the manufacturing equipment would cost $33,960. I would like to think that for now the fire department would manufacture it for us, but that's still in the discussion phase. But I do think that our district is big enough, and just our athletic facilities alone, and like I mentioned with the tablets, we tried to find a device that has a use for our district after COVID-19. And what I think about the manufacturing equipment for hypochlorous acid is that, again, is something that we will use in our athletic facilities, disinfecting bathrooms. It's something that will serve our district well beyond what we're dealing with today. And at this point, I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you so much. And we'll start with Secretary Scott. Do you have questions, comments? You're muted, Noreen.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to me. No, thank you for a great presentation. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, ma'am.
Vice President Morgan.
No questions. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Cullen.
No, well, there's a couple. When you're saying that, when I'm looking at all these costs and all these presentations, I mean, the costs are very, very high. I'm almost scared to go into the Budget Finance Committee to look at these budgets because it's really just killing me. And when I see all these numbers, I have no idea where this is going to come from. But I'm going to go back on the tablets a little bit. So on those tablets, so it's storing the student's information, whether you use the facial recognition or not, correct? Because it's going to store their temperature. And then it's also, you're saying you could use it on transportation, who's on the bus, to send to the transportation. So we are starting to store these students' information then with these tablets?
Yes and no. We would be storing it because as that student comes through and their temperature is taken, we could have that device register again. And I know that if we could do it with a student ID, if we don't want to use facial recognition, but we could figure out a method for that tablet to register who's getting on the bus. So therefore, it would be a record of every student that gets on that bus and eliminate the need for a paper copy. So it would essentially replace the need for the bus driver to have that paper copy of who got on the bus. It would be done in an automated fashion.
Okay. And then again, their temperatures are stored in there every time they take a temperature.
It is stored, but speaking with Mr. Dworsky, that information can be kept in the tablet and not transmitted to the network. So, like I said, I think it has a lot of versatility to meet the needs of how the district wants to go forward.
Yeah, and and obviously that'll come up for a vote in a little bit. I guess I still have a real hard time without having our attorney look at this. There's no policies or procedures in place of this. And obviously what I've looked up in the few minutes before this board meeting is any of the civil rights issues and storing, and there's a lot of questions that I have that I would like to have the attorney review as well. Because it is, because even though you could turn off the facial recognition, we're storing information and it could be put in and without having a policy or procedure in place prior to, does make me very nervous. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. I'm going to go back to Noreen Scott for just a moment. It looked like you had a question.
I do. Back in the Stone Age when I went to high school, we wore a name badge, and that was recorded when we got on the school bus, and it was recorded when we entered the building, and it was recorded in every classroom. So I'm not sure I understand the concerns about capturing that. The only difference is it's going onto a computer instead of a check attendance list.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm having trouble. I mean, I gotta believe that even in the Stone Age we were capturing things. Why wouldn't we be doing it today? And given that we have to show that we have done our due diligence around checking our students and people entering the building, this is a record that if we went into court, we could say, yes, we did check this person. And facial recognition seems to be better than that name badge I had face on it. I don't know. That's just my thinking. It seems like this is not something new. It's just now electronic.
Yeah, and there is some issues with some hacking and those type of things and security on these type of things that has been done in the past. So I won't. This is Board Member Cullen, sorry, but that's why I think that it's good to have everything reviewed. So thank you, Sal. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. And Madam President, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I also wanted to let kind of just bring to the attention is that we have really intense surveillance systems in our schools that capture student faces. It's maintained in our system for a certain period of time. So I do believe that we are collecting facial recognition, maybe not in the sense that we see in some technological applications, but we are collecting that information as students come through the door. We have surveillance cameras that capture them coming through the door. So I don't think that it's nothing new. I think we're currently doing it, just not in this tablet form.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if everyone's necessarily against it. I think we just want to check with Lauren, and I think we can talk about that too more as we get into that last agenda item, because there are some things I think just coming up in the news about this specifically, and so I think we just want to make sure that we're okay on it. And so I don't know if anyone, I don't think Board Member Collins even necessarily totally against it. Just want to make sure that we are that we're looking into those legal things that could come up as we go into it. So, okay, Board Member Coleman. I do not have any questions. Okay. Anything else from anyone else that came up as we discuss through things?
I have a few things. If none of the board has any more questions.
I think you're good, Dr. Cleveland. Go ahead.
Okay. Just a couple of comments. One, prevention is everything. And once we have an outbreak, a cluster outbreak, everything will change in our schools dramatically overnight. So everything we can do to prevent is going to save us so much time, energy, money, grief, everything later. So, I think, we think about putting sick children on a bus, or we think about how we keep children in a care room, or whatever it is we need to do. And those are costly things, but if we get a cluster outbreak, then that cost goes up. But more importantly, the cost goes up in terms of the impact on student lives and staff lives and all of that. One of the things the state is looking at that may have an impact as well, and they have not made a final decision, but I know they're thinking very seriously about it, is having every employee tested within 2 weeks of the start of school. That will be a huge undertaking. And the whole question about whether we have the capacity to do that and what that will look like. And I don't know, Tana, if you want to weigh in on that. Your spouse is an infectious disease MD specialist. on one hand, it certainly does show a commitment to making sure everybody is COVID free. But if it's 2 weeks before the start of school, that doesn't mean in a week you might not get it. And so it's going to be a lot of money and a lot of time and energy. And so one of the things we're hopeful is if the state does decide to go forward with that, they will bring those tests to us. Instead of forcing our 2,000, if you took substitutes in, 2,500 people downtown Albuquerque to have to get tested. So, that's another thing that's on the horizon. It would not be costly, but it will certainly demand a lot from our staff. And so, and I agree with the comments that are made. We already record almost all this information on health cards. It's just a different way of recording it, but we keep all of that information on the individual student health cards. And so it would have to be protected in the same way by HIPAA. But, that's going to be very controversial, the staff testing, because not everybody is going to agree to do it. And everyone is going to want to do that. The others I think you are aware of, but I just want to emphasize again, the state has made it very clear the school district is responsible for buying all the masks. And so that is not something that we will be passing on to people to do. And I think in one of the directives we got, it said 3 to 5 masks per staff member. I'm hoping that if that is the case, that we might be able to do with less if we went with the shields. And I certainly agree with their presentation. It is critical with young children to be able to see facial expressions and to read lips but it's also important to keep middle school and high school kids engaged. And they can't see you. It's just real easy to become very disengaged in what you're talking about. So I think it's really important for all levels that our students are able to see the faces of the people that they are that they are working with. And so those are really the main comments. But the staff testing is worrisome, given that it has to be within a couple of weeks. And again, there's no guarantee the person might not be exposed after. I think, Tana, it was you, but if it wasn't, it was someone else that told me of a person who was tested clear and then three days later tested positive. So that's going to be problematic. But that being said, I think it will build from parents. We tried one more thing to try to keep your children safe. We're doing everything that we can possibly do so that they can come to school. And but I don't know. That's just going to be such an undertaking to get every staff member tested within a 2-week time frame. And for us, that's about 2,500 people, according to my Chavez. I just want to add the last thing. What a great report. Thank you. The first one was strong. The second one was too. I think you're getting a picture, though, people on the board, but in the community that are watching, the complexity of what we're facing as we gear up to start the school year. It's going to be an unprecedented year. It's going to be a year unlike any other. The last thing we've been told is with all our planning, we have to also take into consideration that all of our plans could change immediately with an outbreak. We could go from one level to a completely different level, and we would have to be ready to move quickly should there be an outbreak. In many cases, closing the school, disinfecting the school, depending on the amount of COVID within the building, could be a 14-day quarantine for that building. Again, I just can't stress enough, everything we can do to prevent an outbreak is going to be so much better than waiting till we have one and then dealing with it. And again, the projections of a possible second wave. Another thing that we've got to really try to look at is covering as much content as we can and hoping that we will have much of the content finished by Thanksgiving. And then if we have extra time, it's great. I've been told that New Mexico State University is going to end their semester the end of November based on this information that they've been receiving from the National Health Institute. And there are several others that are following suit with that. So we're going to have to be flexible, and we're going to have things change all the time during the year as we try to manage something that we've just never had any experience with before. But Sal, thank you for that really wonderful report, and thank you for all the people on the committee, and particularly the outreach to several of our community organizations who will play such a key role should we have an outbreak, and including them in that conversation as well.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. I just wanted to touch base real quick with Joe Sanchez. I saw you put your camera on for a second. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything you wanted to add in there.
Thank you, Madam President Galbraith and members of the board and Dr. Cleveland. I just had a couple of thoughts while the conversation was going on. One was that if a student is running a fever at the bus stop and the parent is not present, we could identify a seat on the bus that students with a fever would sit on and immediately provide that student with a mask. So at least they're not spreading potential disease while they're on the bus. I think that's the greatest concern I have with buses is an infected student riding with other students in close proximity. And then the other thought I had was that if we're not able to get approval from PED to put plastic face shields on buses, perhaps the bus driver could just wear a face shield. And those could be easily cleaned by the person wearing them every day and worn multiple times. So that would be a very minimal cost and provide excellent protection from everything I've heard. If they're really concerned, they could wear a mask, a surgical mask with their shield and just get really great protection that way. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Joe. That was helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments on this last presentation?
Just one last one that I thought of when I was listening was to say that everybody should drive their children to school. It's going to create a whole different health hazard. And you think about 2,600 parents driving their kids to school at high school or 1,000 in elementary. We're going to become best friends with the traffic division of the city of Rio Rancho, because of the traffic congestion that that's going to cause. And so we need some children on the bus, but I agree with Joe, that's probably one of the best, not the best, one of the most likely places that you could pick up the virus. You're in an enclosed environment, and but certainly if we had everybody drive, and there are some districts across the country that are going to do that, or tell all their parents they have to drive their children to school or take public transportation. For us, that would cause a huge impact, especially in schools like Rio Rancho Elementary. It's in the middle of a neighborhood. It creates a whole different set of safety hazards and a whole challenge for people who have to get to work, have to drop their children off. So you look at one option and here comes a whole set of other things that you have to consider. But thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland, and thanks again, Sal, for a great presentation. I'd like to just do a 5-minute break. I know we like to work through things, but we've been on for a long time, so if we could take a 5-minute break. I have 7:57 down, so 5 minutes from now, and
Sorry, I forgot to put it back on. So I'm back.
You're good. Just want to see a couple people. Okay. Okay, I believe we are live. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you. I don't think I ate a salad so fast in all my life, but I needed a moment before moving on. So thank you. We will now move on with item D. We'll be considering approval of the CTE curriculum adoption, and this is going to be presented by Carl Leppelman, David Latham, and Benton Spradlin.
Good evening. President Galbraith, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Chief Academic Officer. And before I begin, I'd like to recognize not only David Latham and Benton Spradlin, but the entire committee who worked on this, as well as the business partners. And I'd like to actually also point out the CT Advisory Committee, which board member Colin serves on, has really helped us to move career technical education forward in Rio Rancho schools. So Jane, I'd ask you to let's go to the first slide, please. The Career Technical Advisory Council really established 4 goals. And what I'd like to do is draw your attention to number 2 and 3, because tonight has actually, I think, a profound impact on those goals. We've made significant progress on expanding the offerings of the career technical pathways. You could, some of you are aware of that. Some of your children have been in those programs, and we think those are very critical for the future of the students. When we look at number 3, what we're trying to do tonight with the purchase of these materials is really to help students get sequencings of courses that grow from basic to more sophisticated, more complex over time. So, and hopefully lead to some type of credential or some type of certification. So tonight is important. We've heard tonight there are a lot of costs going into next year, so we're aware of that. And really the recommendation we're looking at tonight is just the actual materials. You'll see a recommendation in terms of the cost, and that will be dependent upon funding from the public education department. So I'll turn it over to, I believe, Benton, and he will cover the committee and some of the work they did and the criteria they had for selecting materials.
Okay, yes. Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland. Next slide, please.
I will, Benton. Would you mind turning your camera on, please, so we can see you?
Oh, turn the camera on? Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. You see me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, so next slide, please. Okay, so the primary goal in the CT adoption initiative here was just to make sure that we adopted high quality instructional materials for the students. I mean, we didn't want to lose sight of that. It was quite an undertaking. You consider all the different programs at the different schools. It encompassed 31 different programs that impacted over 6,000 students, grades 6 through 12. What's unique about that is what made that quite an undertaking was each one of those programs is completely unique and has completely unique needs and goals. So we looked at the PET approved materials that we received. We looked at a lot of other supplemental materials. We made sure everything that we were looking at and considering aligned with the CTE core standards. And it was also in alignment with all of our course sequences. And we made particular effort to ensure that each one of them could be have an online and a virtual delivery. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Dave.
This is David Latham, Madam President, Board, Dr. Cleveland. When we started looking at all these different programs, and you can see on this slide here that there are 31 different programs. There's 12 in the middle schools and 19 in the high schools. We wanted to make sure that we had quality material like Benton talked about. One of the things that, one of the comments that we got back from one of the parents was that they didn't see automotive. And one of the things that we had to make sure that people knew is the automotive program was added new last year. So the automotive curriculum was added last year. So that program has new curriculum already. Jane, next slide, please. So the program itself, you can see the team adoption. Here's the teachers that were involved, the administrators that were involved. We had a lot of people involved, like Benton talked about. There are so many different types of programs, and a lot of them are standalones. They're not really related to a lot of the other programs. So it was a mass undertaking, just getting this information together. Right. Next slide.
Okay, so Benton again here. So I kind of just quickly walk you through the steps that we went through. As I mentioned previously, we got the adopted list from the PED. We curated a huge list of supplemental materials for the teachers. We delivered that to them electronically. Soon after that, we met with each teacher in every program, all the while continue to make contact with the curricular companies. Shared a spreadsheet with the teachers where they could see all of their options, and gave them access to sheets where they could put their request or the things that they were considering. The third quarter, we again met with the teachers face to face for a second time. We continue to have meetings with the curricular companies. In all, we met with 14 different curriculum companies. Some of them face to face, most of them virtual meetings. Our CT advisory committee, we met with and gave an update to regarding the curriculum adoption. And our committee met with formally a couple times with Carl and had many conversations regarding the budget. And we had to make adjustments to that, and we had to really consider that we just couldn't spend all the money that we wanted to, that we had to really be thoughtful about and make good decisions about what we did from a financial perspective. And then in the fourth quarter, we finalized the curriculum requests. We had to do a kind of a multi-year purchasing scenario where we looked at, in the next couple slides, I'll go over this, but looked at what it looked like if we just purchased it for a year versus 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And we posted the selections up on the website. We did, and we also sent mass emails through School Messenger and other methods to our business partners, as well as over 2,000 parents of CTE students. We got a good amount of feedback back from that and input back from that, and it was all, asking for clarification. It was all very positive. Next slide, please, Jane. Okay, so this one right here is this shows a comparison and contrast of what an upfront cost for a multi-year commitment would be for different years versus purchasing everything a year at a time. So not to make this overly complicated, if we, so the numbers on the left there, let's say we did a upfront, we committed for 2 years, our upfront cost this year would be $115,000, and so on and so forth until you get to year 6. If we committed upfront to a 6-year commitment, it'd be $151,711. And if we just could commit to, $103,445 for the first year, we would be having to go back every year, and we wouldn't be having to look at everything again, but there would be several items we would have to purchase one at a time every year. And that total cost at the end of 6 years would be about $171,000. So there's a savings there, about $20,000 if you commit to the 6 years for right up front. Not to mention all the time, the administrative time, the meetings, the conversations with the curriculum companies. I just feel like, there's a lot of time spent when you have to go back and revisit it every year. So that takes us to our recommendation there on the next slide, if you would, please.
This is David Latham again, Madam President, Board, Dr. Cleveland. Our recommendation is to adopt the 6-year plan to maximize our return on investment. That would be $151,711. We would go ahead and it's really going to be dependent upon our upcoming legislative session, what money we're going to be getting for this from the legislature. So we're not really sure right now. I don't think anybody's really sure what we're going to get probably for a couple of weeks. And then, but our recommendation is to go ahead and adopt for a 6-year term. The trainings will be virtual. Our companies have been really good about getting back with us. We've had really good response from some business partners and again, parents, like Ben said, who talked about and asked questions and gave input. And so we were really pleased with that. But that is our report at this time, and we would stand for questions.
Okay, thank you so much for your report. We'll start with Noreen Scott. Would you?
Yes, this is Noreen Scott. I had a couple questions. Quite a few of these programs change. I mean, the technology changes very rapidly with them. Does buying the curriculum now and locking in for 6 years allow us to change and update and upgrade in the areas of specifically film and robotics and computer science and, well, almost everything? There's changes, dramatic changes annually. How does that fit in?
Benton, I'll let you answer that.
I'll go ahead and take that one. Yes, so the access to updates, annual updates, we'll have, we'll be able to get access to any updates to any software or online platform that we go into a contract with. That's a really good question. So the answer is yes.
My second question is, wasn't there some discussion about us doing some welding programs too? at one point?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yes, Madam President, Board, Dr. Cleveland, we have a dual credit program. We have several dual credit programs. In fact, we have 4 dual credit programs with CNM. Welding was one of those programs. So it's a dual credit program. So the student is really a CNM student and a Rio Rancho public school student. So CNM adopts that material and they adopt that curriculum. So our students basically use whatever CNM is using at the time.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Secretary Scott. Jeffrey Morgan, questions, comments?
Board Member Jeffrey Morgan has no comments, no questions. Job well done, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you guys changed the screen on me now. I have to find everyone. Board Member Cullen.
Thank you. No, I just thank you for putting that together, and I'm definitely supportive of doing that. So thank you, guys.
Thank
you. Yeah. Board Member Coleman.
Yeah, to put up again, well, and I have it here. Here, hold on, I've got it on my other screen. I guess I wanted to just, and you might have addressed it, but when it comes to, I just think of these CTE programs as very hands-on, and how we're really going to make that really worth their while, based on everything that's going on.
Madam President, Dr. Cleveland Board, that's a great question. You know, I had that same conversation today with one of the committees that was asking how we're going to do this. The dual credit programs, I can tell you CNM right now is working on it. In fact, I've been in contact with the welding piece, and they're working out details on that. Our automotive, Jim Gore, automotive teacher, he's already been looking at that and talking about, you know, how many students can he get in there? What is it going to look like? So we're aware of that one. It's really going to depend upon, I think, what format we're going to use when we go back to school. You know, are we going to have 25% of the kids there? Are we going to have 50% of the kids there? I don't think it's going to be as big a problem as people think it is. I think, yes, we're going to have to do some extra sanitizing in culinary arts and in some programs, but I think overall, I think we're going to be able to function very well when it comes back. And it's like the report we had with Sal. I think you're going to have to go back and look at how are you going to take care of the sanitizing and how are you going to clean and how are you going to do that. One of the things, of course, with computers, we're going to have to look at, but we've been doing that at night school for a long time anyway, been cleaning computers and doing that as we go. So I don't think it's going to be as big a problems. I think we're going to have to sit down and work through those problems, but I think we have a good team and I think we'll be able to do that.
So I know, I mean, some of these things are coming to the board and asking for us to approve things. And I'm trying to really kind of visualize something like CTE and really knowing that the students that are in that program are going to get that hands-on experience. And I get a little apprehensive just saying, so having to vote on something and saying, well, we'll work through it. And so can you maybe give a little bit more detail on how you really see such a hands-on opportunity and really making sure that the students that are in that program are getting what they need or what they're participating in?
I think it will depend upon the program that they're working on. I think if you look at DECA is completely different than say the film programs, which is different than the culinary programs. So I think each program will need to be able to work through that. I do not have all the answers. We can come back to the board and give you more of an update later on. I think that would be more appropriate. But I think right now, if you look at it, what we're going to really have to sit down and do is we're going to have to find out what our options are with the number of students in school. Okay, so if we're looking at labs, just straight labs, are we going to get as much lab time? We might not. CNM is looking at extending their labs maybe and starting their labs a little bit later. They're also reducing the number of the students in the lab. And I think that's the direction we'll have to go. We will not be able to have 24, 30 students in that lab at one time. I think we will have to make sure that we can run the lab safely and in a manner that follows all the protocol. So I don't know, Madam Coleman, at this time, if I can give you any more. I can tell you that we can work on it and we can come back to you with more.
Well, and we're looking at a 6-year adoption, right? So this year it might not be, I guess, right, everything that it should be. But we're looking at a curriculum adoption, if I'm understanding correctly, for over a number of years. And so it might not look, I guess, the way it should, but hopefully, I'm hoping, please, by next year, maybe it'll look a little bit better. Now, Wynn Coleman, do you have more comments or questions on that?
No, it's just, I know that there are small windows of opportunity for students in some of the programs, and they're a junior or whatever. And so I think those are the things that I'm not, it's not that I'm opposed. It's just that I can't imagine what the staff is going through and administration is going through and trying to put this all together. I'm just kind of wondering, are we really going to be able to offer for our students that have like 1 or 2 more years left of high school, where this really might impact them with this program, that they really can get what they need? So that's all.
I was just going to jump in.
I'm sorry, yeah. Member Coleman, yes, and these are good questions. I think when we look at this, David's mentioned it's by program, and some of the materials are really digital, so they can work very, very well in this environment. The hands-on is where we're going to need to be much more careful, and some are actual textbooks or workbooks, those kinds of things over a 6-year period. What we could do, and I would suggest we go back, and Benton has done an excellent job working with the teams of teachers, is go back and see now we know, once we know more about the COVID-19 and what school looks like, how do we deliver these hands-on programs? How do we help students get those engaging experiences they don't have typically virtually like we are right now? I mean, this is not the typical way you would learn how to change oil, let's say, or work on robotics or build, but you can do some things in robotics or computer science. So I think we need to be very careful not to purchase any materials that we could not use effectively. But the ICEV materials, which we've looked at with DECA, a lot of that's online, accounting, other types of entrepreneurial coursework that they could do. So I think that, again, we did budget $2.5 million in the budget, or you did as a board, as far as the instruction materials. The question is going to be in the legislative session, are they going to reduce those numbers? So we may not have those funds anyway. But I think getting kids in to do these types of activities, they're asking for it. And if it leads to a certification, unfortunately, we had to stop the summer auto program where kids were going to get their certifications. And we want to go back and make sure those students can get those certifications.
Ben, did you want to add to that? I know you're muted.
I was just echoing. I mean, obviously, with hands-on learning, it's not going to be an ideal learning environment. If we'd rather, be in our traditional learning environment, and that would where we could maximize our hands-on in our labs. It's, I just kind of echo what everybody's saying. We're going to have to just kind of see, what the parameters are that we're going to be working in, and try to maximize the learning that we can do, and all the virtual and online that we can take advantage of to simulate hands-on or you know, we want to do that, and hopefully we'll get to a situation where we can, you know, we can be safely hands-on in a biomedical lab and a robotics lab and automotive and welding and everything. So there's just, you know, like with everything we've been talking about in this board meeting, there's just so many unanswered questions. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. How large are these classrooms usually? Like the amount of kids in them? I don't know if anyone knows that. It probably varies, I'm sure.
It really varies. I mean, some of the upper level CTE classes can get, you know, are much smaller because you're trying to keep, you know, a program of studies alive, and you want that 3 to 4 class sequence, and you might have smaller classes. But in the entry level classes, first and second year classes, it's, you know, you're right there at 30. You know, every classroom and lab environment kind of varies. But you know, for instance, at the automotive, the transportation facility, it's a max of 15 in a pretty large area. But it really does depend on the situation. They're all so different, you know. Some are really hands-on from the beginning, from the first class all the way through, and some of them are, you know, quite, you know, academic and not as much hands-on. So the CTE umbrella just really kind of encompasses a whole lot, you know, everything from engineering to automotive. So.
Sounds good. Thank you. That helps. Board Member Coleman, do you have any more questions? No? Okay. Anyone else generate any questions before I go to Dr. Cleveland for, oh, David.
Madam President, really quickly, I'd just like to thank Benton Bradley, who put a lot of effort and a lot of work into this, and also Paul Lockhart, who's not on tonight, but he helped out tremendously. So I'd really like to thank both of them for putting many hours into this, and also the teachers and the administrators and the business partners and that we had to help out. So I'm really appreciative of everybody who put their time and effort into it. Thank you.
Thank you. And we appreciate all of you too. I know many on the board are very passionate about CTE. And so we appreciate all that you've done for that program and helping it grow. And so thank you. And Dr. Cleveland, did you want to add anything?
Just 2 comments. One is the amount of money that we have is ridiculous to start with. I mean, if you look at the dollars in comparison to districts and other places, other states, I mean, it's just such a small amount to do anything with in the first place. So, you know, if we ever really want to get serious about CTE in New Mexico, we're going to have to dedicate a revenue stream, as they do in other states, that will fund these programs and will, you know, provide for them at a higher level than what we've been able to do so far in our state. A couple of things. One is and I think Benton or Dave mentioned it earlier. So much of training in any area now is virtual. They estimate that 80% of what you do to learn to fly a plane is now simulator training before you ever get to go to the real thing. And so a lot of the virtual programming is really pretty high quality. It's just not all, you know, low quality stuff. So I think that's an important thing. And then the last is that one of the things for CTE that we're battling right now is if we don't continue to support the programs, even if they're not ideal, we're going to lose these kids. And they're going to go do something else. And so anything we can do to keep them interested and involved and engaged, even if it's not at the very highest level, is better than nothing. Because once they give up and move on, then we won't get them back on these programs again. So I think that's the other piece that really wasn't discussed, is the whole thing of student engagement and keeping students attached to the program during these really difficult times. I was in a session where CNN president was addressing this very issue of trying to keep students involved and attached to their programs until they get into a better environment for hands-on labs or whatever. So I see it as an attempt to keep these, to keep the interest there and alive. But I agree with the comments that it's not certainly not the best. It's not the highest quality that we would like to offer, but it sure is better than nothing. And it does keep our students interested. And I think they're like we are. I think their parents are like we are. They're all hoping, as President Galbraith said, a year from now things will be better, and they want them to stay and continue to be part of the program.
Okay, thank you for that. So is there a motion on the floor to approve the CTE curriculum adoption?
This is Board Member Catherine Cullen. I so move.
Board Member Noreen Scott, I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion by Catherine Cullen and a second by Noreen Scott. Jane, can you take a roll call for us vote on this?
Well, Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman,
Yes.
Madam President Galbraith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
May I just say one really quick thing that kind of came to mind when I was listening to Dr. Cleveland speak? This is Board Member Coleman. This might be a great opportunity to really have the chance to make things even more accessible to some of the, for example, like the Independence High School students. And if we're having to modify things, this might be a way to get them into some of the programs that were somewhat of a challenge due to transportation and things like that. So good points. I appreciate that, Dr. Cleveland.
Yeah, that's great.
Say,
go ahead.
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland, you make a really good point there. We're making a concerted effort to, the automotive program is open to members, students at Independence and Cyber, as well as Rio Rancho High in Cleveland, and we're constantly looking at that and ways to, reach out to all of our student population and not just have it, only available to the students at the 2 comprehensive high schools.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate your presentation and everything. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you all.
We will move on to consider the approval of Enchanted Mesa Daycare lease agreement. And Tana, once again, Tana Burgos will be our presenter on this one. You get double duty.
I know. Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland, Shelley will also join me as well if there are any questions. As you know, the Shining Star Preschool is moving, and so therefore Enchanted Mesa Daycare has to move. And we have spent probably a good 6 months working up to this point with the agreement of this lease and the time. Lauren Patch has been a part of that the entire time. He has gone over this lease. He has been able to recommend changes. And then those that we are in the agreement with the lease have agreed to this as well. So we are bringing it to you for any questions that you might have for you to approve. We are moving the daycare because Shining Star Preschool is moving, and this is the daycare, Enchanted Mesa Daycare, for our staff's children. And it is a paid program by our staff. So it is fully functional. The money comes from our staff, and it does not come out of operational funds. So anything that we're doing at the building, we are having to pay for out of our budget. So I stand for any questions that you have, and Shelley will be able to answer some of those as well if there are some that are more specific, since she's been working on this the last couple of weeks more specifically.
Okay, thank you. Let's start with Secretary Scott. Do you have any questions on the lease agreement? Or
can I defer my questions and let others ask for a minute while I work out some math?
Yes, that's just fine. Vice President Morgan, would you like to give any comments or questions?
No comments, no questions, thank you.
Okay. Catherine Cullen, board member Catherine Cullen.
Yes, this is board member Catherine Cullen. So what happens if we don't get a lot of kids from the daycare this year into this next school year, since it pays for themselves and we have this lease agreement? And if we're having to, if the parents decide to keep the little ones at home.
So basically, right. And that is something that we've spent a lot of time talking about. But this is the Enchanted Mesa daycare, which is our employees. So therefore they have been working, and we did have a meeting with them all in May, and everybody was part of that meeting online. And everybody very much, and Shelley can speak to this as well more, very much wants the daycare, is willing to pay. They understand there might be some days they won't be using it. It's very typical to any daycare that you have to pay the set amount so that they can have the staff. And because they believe in the daycare and and where it's gone, and that we're CYFD licensed and how much we put into it, most of the parents really felt positive about it. They felt like they did want to pay that, but that doesn't mean everybody, but most of the parents did. And Shelley, I'll let you speak to that as well.
Sure. So we currently have an enrollment of 48 students. We did do a pre-registration for the daycare to open again in August. And right now we do have all students with the exception of 2 returning. And then we also have a wait list of over 40 students currently. So our wait list and our interest as far as the demand for quality childcare in Rio Rancho among our staff is nearly enough to replace the current enrollment. So there's definitely a need to do that. And the other stipulation is that regardless of if a child was present, that the tuition would in fact be due. We were able to not do that during the COVID closure due to some of the, the emergency care that we've been providing for other families outside of our own. However, for next school year, that would provide for that piece of it. So that tuition would be required regardless, as that's what is typical of a commercial daycare.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was my big concern is how many might have dropped out and all that. So thank you.
Good question. Wynn Coleman.
Yes. So I'm wondering, I keep thinking about the building that we're purchasing and needing to spend money to renovate. That was going to be the Student Services Center. And has there been thought to actually using that at this time for that, and then taking the money that you're saying you need to go ahead and update this building and put it towards what we're going to spend to have to renovate that building?
My understanding, and we met with Michael Baker on this, and he can speak to this, is that we are not allowed to use that building. We would have to pay rent to the district, and any type of retrofitting, because that building is not set for smaller children and the number of bathrooms that you have, how it has to be set up. So there would be an amazing amount of remodeling and cost that would go with a building that is being purchased from district funds. And so this building that we are going to have a lease agreement with was set up as a daycare before. So we're only having to do some minor changes. Thank you, Jane. We're only having to do some minor changes in that. And we're also using that money that the parents are paying our staff on this lease, which we can't be doing that in a building that's being paid by the district.
Okay, no, thank you for that clarification. That's the only question I had.
Okay.
And Secretary Scott, back to you. You're muted though. Try your space bar. I don't know if that helps in this one. You're still muted, Secretary Scott. It's all right. We'll just wait for you. Jane might be able to. Jane, can you actually unmute Secretary Scott on your end? I don't know if that's
I just did.
Oh, there we go. There we
Okay.
go.
Okay, so I have a series of questions. The first being, where were we currently holding this daycare?
So the daycare has been for quite some time on the Shining Star Preschool campus on the west end.
And we previously were not paying rent. Is that right? Or we were?
No, we've been paying rent.
Okay. All right. And then what is the cost of the renovation? Did I miss that?
For the new building that we're going to?
Yes.
So I'll let Shelley speak to that, but it is a low cost because it was already a daycare before. So we're only having to do some minor changes.
Okay.
So in terms of the renovations, as far as on the diagram, anything in red will be eliminated or taken out to open up spaces. Anything in green will be added. And with those interior renovations, including the addition of a sink and those wall removal or replacement, that will actually be done by the facility owner. So as a tenant, those are things that we're requesting prior to taking the lease on July 1st, which he has in fact agreed to. So as far as the improvements that we're looking at, we're currently looking at IT improvements that include things like Wi-Fi, our cameras, fob for the access to the entry by all the staff members who use the daycare. That, as far as any kind of wiring for phones and things like that, we're looking at around $9,000. And then for the exterior, the only improvements that we're needing in terms of our CYFD licensing have to do with fencing for both safety and a more extensive playground area. It does have a very small fenced area, but we're wanting to expand that to meet the needs of our classes and the sizes of the groups. So that is right around the area of $11,000 for parts and labor for fencing and securing the exterior portion that students will have access to. So we're looking at that piece at roughly $20,000. And our budget for the renovations, I'm looking at $25,000 to $28,000 as kind of our ballpark figure in terms of, you know, if there's any furniture replacement, if we need to have any latches or locks or anything installed for safety on the inside. But those will all come out of our cash carryover that we have in our EMDC budget currently. So this is all through prior tuition savings and our self-funded budget at this time.
So where would you go after 3 years?
We have the option to extend.
I was just going to say, our plan is to not move from here after 3 years, but that's the lease agreement that we all chose to just have at this point. But our plan wouldn't be to move. Our plan is thinking we're going to stay for a long time, but that's just the term of the lease agreement right now.
The term appears to be about $10 a square foot, which is a really good market rate. So it looks like it's a good thing for both the tenant and the landlord.
Agreed.
Any further questions, Secretary Scott?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the board that Dr. Cleveland, did you want to give anything additional?
Yeah, I apologize to the board because the new folks probably don't have that background and kind of know where we've come from. So it has been on the Shining Stars site, and prior to that, way back. And so as you are aware, that site is being vacated. And so the feeling of leaving it alone there without any other support around doesn't feel really very good. The other piece is if we in fact want to sell that property, we need to move it off of that property in order to be able to list it, to sell it. And there has been there's been quite a interest on the part of some folks in the city that we open that site for others to look at for commercial development, perhaps. So that's the background. And we were very concerned about what we were going to do because our staff has counted on this for so many years. And Sana says self-supporting, but they really do need it. And so when this site came open, I will say the owner really did take an interest in trying to make this work for us. Julian felt like he wanted to support it. So it is, I think, a very fair price. And I think it will continue to support staff. You know, as we look at this year coming on, you're getting, I think, a really good picture of all the stresses that are going to be out there. And one of the greatest stressors is daycare for for our staff and for particularly their very young children. It keeps a lot of their very fine teachers in this school district. So, and not just teachers, but others as well. So I apologize, as we should have been maybe a little more, going back over the history. But we do feel it's important to keep teachers in the district. We think it's been a great recruiting tool. We think those children are kept in a very good, safe place. It's centralized to all of the staff in the Rio Rancho district. It's about as central as you could possibly get. And that location is right on Northern, so it's I think a very safe location in terms of security. So that's just a little of the background, but we felt like we were very lucky to be able to find this.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. I knew a little bit about it just because my kids all attended Shining Stars and Hearing, just because it was on that same campus where my kids were. So thank you for that. Any other questions, comments? Okay. I will entertain a motion.
Does anybody want to make a motion?
You go ahead.
I guess I would have. So we're making a motion that we accept the lease agreement for
Enchanted Mesa.
What is it?
Enchanted Mesa Daycare.
Okay. Enchanted Mesa Daycare.
This is board member.
Oh, go ahead.
This is board member Catherine Cullen. I'll go ahead and second. And I'm sorry, I'm losing feed. So you guys cut out for a little bit. So I'm turning off my camera because of that.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, for letting us know. Okay, so we have a motion by Jeffrey Morgan and a second by Catherine Cullen. Jane, can you take a roll call vote on this for approval?
I will. Vice President Morgan?
Yes.
Secretary Scott?
Yes.
Board Member Cullen?
Yes.
Board Member Coleman?
Yes.
President Galbraith?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just say one more quick thing, again, for anybody watching? This is totally self-sustaining. The staff pays for it and supports it, and the district this is not something that we are taking money out of a budget for other things to support, but we are doing it as convenience for our staff, but it is self-sustaining, and I think that's really important for people to know in these really tough financial times.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cleveland, for that clarification. That is an important clarification to make. So thank you, Tana and Shelley, for the presentation and for answering our questions. We appreciate it. Okay, we will now move on to item F, to consider the approval of policy 208, meetings of the board, and Lauren Hatch will be presenting this to us.
Thank you, Madam President, board members, and Dr. Cleveland. This is the second reading for the proposed changes to policy 208. If you recall our last meeting, we discussed that we're adding a new section to 208. It's section G. It's on page 6 of the policy. This allows the board to handle states of emergency a little bit different with how they run meetings. Sometimes they need to be consolidated or handled in a way that's only dealing with urgent matters according to the guidelines that were given to us by the Attorney General, and also allows the board to authorize the use of digital and digitized signatures for board documents. And then it sets out the policy and the procedure, kind of how we would operate a virtual meeting in the situation of a state of emergency or some other similar emergent circumstance. We don't have very many natural disasters around here in New Mexico, so it's hard to imagine what that might be, but it gives the board some flexibility on how that's done. Again, it requires us to follow the guidelines that are issued by the Attorney General, even if it might specifically conflict with what our policy says. The Attorney General is the one that's tasked with enforcing the Open Meetings Act, so we want to follow that guidance. I stand for any questions.
Catherine Cullen, do you have any questions? Go to board member.
No, board member Cohen. No, I don't, but I maybe a couple of words. So I apologize.
Okay. Board member Coleman, questions? None. Secretary Scott, questions?
I have no questions. Thank you, Lauren.
Vice President Morgan?
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just gonna make a motion. I move to approve policy 208 as presented by Lauren Hatch.
Board member Cohen,
I have a couple seconds. I'll go with the second for Noreen Scott on that one today. But Jane, can you take a roll call vote on that?
I will. Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
yes.
Board Member Coleman.
Okay.
She just went out. I think she was going to hit mute. President Galbraith,
Yes.
and I'll wait for Wynn to join.
For just a moment. She doesn't come back in. That's okay.
Did she say that if she's coming back on?
I don't see anything from her. I think we can move on with the votes as we have them.
Okay, thank you.
We still have a quorum. Yeah.
Yeah. So, go ahead. Continue on, Jane.
That was it, 4-0.
Okay. I can't remember if I said yes or no.
Said yes.
Okay.
There she is.
I'm here. I hit the wrong button. I vote yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Motion carries 5-0 then. Okay. Thank you, Lauren, for that. So we'll now move on to consider approval of the 2020-2021 board schedule of regular meetings. And I am presenting this. So Jane has it up here on our screens. Hopefully you've had a chance to look it over. Board Member Collin, do you have any questions or concerns with the schedule as presented?
No, I do not. Did you ask me, Cullen?
Yeah.
Board member Cullen? Okay, just want to make sure.
You're good. Board Member Coleman, any questions on this or?
No, I have none. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Scott?
Yes, I have one question. It says in the district office, does that mean that starting in July, we will not be virtual any longer?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
No, it doesn't mean that at all. Right now, we're under a public health order, no more than 5 people in a meeting. So it would stay, but we could, it's the virtual district office. So
There you go. That
okay,
works.
I don't know, but no, it doesn't mean that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
I can edit it and put TBD to be determined in July and August even, if you'd like.
I think it's okay, because if we do that, then I think we have to come back and vote on it. Unless I'm wrong, I think we can just leave it as is. And am I wrong on that? Lauren, are you there?
Madam President, Lauren Hatch, General Counsel, the policy we just passed allows the board to hold any meeting, the virtual meeting, when we're in a state of emergency. So I think you're fine the way that it's written.
Okay, perfect.
We'll hope that things are different soon.
Yes. Thank you. Though I say it's really nice to be able to see everyone's face on one screen for me. It's very helpful. Jeffrey Morgan, do you have any further questions?
I don't. I was just going to ask the question that Noreen asked about changing it from the district office room, but we're good. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. Is there a motion?
I so move. This is Member Catherine Cullen.
And Board Member Coleman, I second.
Okay, we have a motion by Catherine Cullen and a second by Wynn Coleman. Jane, can you please take a roll call vote for approval?
I will. Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman,
Yes.
President Galbraith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, motion carries 5-0. So we are now moving on to our, where we moved our consent agenda items down. So item H for Chromebooks, the approval of the purchase of Chromebooks. Are there, so this is just on Chromebooks, are there additional questions or comments on the Chromebooks? I'll start with Vice President Morgan.
No questions on the Chromebook.
Okay. Secretary Scott.
No questions on the Chromebooks.
Wynn Coleman.
No questions.
And Catherine Cullen.
No questions on the Chromebooks.
Okay. Motion to approve?
I so move to approve the bar for the Chromebooks.
Chromebooks. Okay, is there a second?
Board Member Jeffrey Morgan, I second.
Okay. Jane, can you take a roll call vote on approval on the bar for the Chromebooks?
I will. Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
Yes.
Board Member Coleman,
Yes.
President Galbraith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So motion carries 5-0. Okay, so item I is for approval of the scanner tablets, which have been discussed throughout the meeting. And I'll start with Noreen Scott, Secretary Scott. Do you have questions or comments you would like to make about the scanner tablets? And hopefully Sal is on and Mike and everyone who needs to help us out on this. And Lauren, I think we're going to need you also as we go through these things. So go ahead.
I have no questions.
Okay. Let's go over to Catherine Cullen.
I have no further questions. I just, I do feel that we need to have further legal review, and it's pretty extensive for us to be voting on this without having any type of legal review on this. Thank you.
Lauren, you want to take a second and just talk to that for a moment about some of the legal things and what we can do with that?
Yeah. So I've Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland, this is Lauren Henchigan, the General Counsel. I've had some opportunity to kind of take a look at what is out there on this subject. I haven't found any United States law on facial recognition. I haven't found any New Mexico law on it. There's some statutes in other states having to do with biometric privacy, but nothing here in the state of New Mexico. I haven't found a regulation or anything in the state of New Mexico. So I would say it's not prohibited. But if we were going to do it, I think we would want to have a policy that explains how it's used, when it's used. And then what would be very important is to understand exactly how the system works and how the vendor interfaces with that, and what is done with the information, who owns the information, how is it stored, making sure that it's not shared by third parties, that type of thing. And I think we could work out most of that in a policy. The rest of it would be reviewing an agreement. So I hope that's helpful. I think if you wanted to approve it, it could not be deployed until we had a policy in place, but I'd leave that up to the board, I guess.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren, for that. Catherine, do you have further questions on that right now?
No, I just been doing some research too, and there's some privacy issues that I think that there is, and whether a board puts this in place now, of course, it can change anytime with a different board. So there is with any procedures. So anyway, I just have some concerns, and obviously the price is pretty high up there, and it's just a number of issues on this. So I think if we were to proceed on this, I believe there would have to be a policy and guidelines put in place, procedures for any type of privacy issues that might occur.
Okay, thank you. Lynn Coleman.
As often as we are meeting this month, is this something that we could just do our due diligence, get the information that we need to come back the next time and then vote on this?
Sal, how fast do we need to move on this? Like if we don't, and maybe Mike too, if we don't move on this tonight, if we move on it next week, is that an issue? Go ahead.
From my perspective, of course, I'd like to see it done as soon as possible so that we can work on that practice and procedure and put protocols in place, work with the device, get them in our hands, look at how we would deploy them, put together our reaction teams and actually run drills and see what would we do with a student that presented a fever or symptoms of COVID-19. So of course, from my perspective, from a planning perspective, I'd like to see us move on it as soon as possible. I understand everybody's concerns. And I'd like, I'm sure Mr. Baker will have something to add to that as well.
Yeah, Madam President, I would like to add to that. So I did ask Sal and Paul to essentially a number of weeks ago to take a look at this device, knowing really that it was a device that would take the temperature of people entering a building or a school. And so originally, the idea, and really the only idea, and the problem that we were trying to resolve was, number one, how do we take the temperature of a lot of people? And secondly, how do we record that in an effective and efficient manner? And I saw that potentially this particular device could do that. I did not know at the time that it had the capacity to do facial recognition. After Sal and Paul went through a demo, they informed me of the facial recognition, and I thought that was a bonus for a lot of reasons. But the initial and probably the most important reason that we're bringing this to you has to do with the temperature, taking the temperature of the people walking into the building or the schools. And that really is the focus. As the vendor in the demonstration said, we could turn off the facial recognition until such time that we felt comfortable deploying that particular aspect of that device. Yes, it is very expensive. And unfortunately, we are in an environment right now where we are rushing to do all kinds of things to try to prepare for the opening of school. We're not even sure how school is going to look like when it's going to open. We know that it will open. We don't know if it's going to be 50% capacity, 25% capacity, or 100% capacity for that matter. But we're trying to plan for the contingencies that are going to be upon us really within probably about 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. We don't know what that's going to look like. But we all have been listening to the governor give her presentations and her take on this pandemic, as well as the Secretary of PED. And my sense, and Dr. Cleveland, correct me if I'm wrong, but they seem to be very, very cautious. And the issue is, what are we going to do to try to mitigate, to the best of our ability, mitigate the spread of this disease? And this was one piece of equipment that I thought could lead to mitigating a widespread um, of the disease getting into our schools, because we would be able to quickly and effectively screen out those students and staff members that entered the buildings. And just on that fact, we thought it would be very, very effective. We have been trying to purchase PPE, and as you all know, we are not the only district trying to mitigate the spread amongst our students or other employers that are trying to mitigate with their employees. Everybody's trying to purchase PPE, masks, gowns, shields, temperature gauges, the list goes on. And these items are very, very difficult to get. We had an opportunity. We believe that we can purchase these devices in a short period of time, and we thought it was a good opportunity. Is it possible that we're going to spend $165,000 and by God, all of a sudden there's going to be a vaccine and these devices are really going to be of little use? Yes, that is a possibility. And we've spent thousands of dollars already on face masks and thousands of dollars on disinfectant, and the list goes on. But we don't think that this thing is going to go away anytime soon. And so that's why we're making these presentations, and that's why we're making these presentations very quickly. Yes, I'd like to spend a lot of time researching and making sure that everything is done legally, appropriately, and efficiently. But in this situation, we are asking for approval so we can move with the purchase. We can delay the facial recognition component of this device if that is the only aspect of this purchase that the board has heartache with. And I understand that, and that makes sense to me. But I just wanted to reiterate the main purpose is not the facial recognition of this device. It's taking the temperature of students and staff that are entering our buildings in an effective and efficient way.
Madam Chairman, Madam President Galbraith, this is Secretary Scott. Let me take a leap into this to just see if we can move us along. I move to approve the purchase of these books, these little computer books that take temperatures and might even be used to do facial recognition.
Well, I have a statement, a comment before we vote on that.
Please. Go ahead.
I'm okay with the device. I just want to make sure we get clarity and get better connection on. We've got 71 that we're looking to order for the schools, and then we've got another. I can't remember how many it was for the buses.
64.
So I just want to make sure we only, because at one point we were saying we don't take the temperature of the kids as they get on the bus. They take it at school. And then at one point we were saying we do take the temperature of the kids on the bus. And when they get to school, they just go right into another door. I just want to make sure we own, because I'd hate to buy 71 and then 64, and then we decide we'll just take the temperature at school. So I'm okay with the device. I just want to make sure we're on the same page about how many we're going to buy and what we're going to do with it.
Yeah, Madam President, may I address that?
Please do.
Yeah, so students and staff arrive at our school sites from a variety of different methods. Some of the students, I think it's probably less than 50%, arrive by school bus. Some of the students actually walk to school. Some of the students, their parents drive them. Some of the students, they drive themselves, and certainly our staff typically will drive themselves to school. So there's a variety of different methods in different directions where people are coming into the school. So the benefit of having the device in the school is that we would be able to check everybody. However, and I think Board Member Morgan, what you're getting at is that the problem that we have is those students that are getting on a bus, they potentially could be infected, and they can infect others while riding the school bus en route to school. And that is a possibility. So at this point, I don't know, we don't have that particular device ready to be obtained. We can, but you all listen to the task force give these presentations. And so one of the things, as they were developing these presentations, I asked Tracy to go through these presentations and select out all the budget items that would be required if we were actually to institute everything. And so right now, with all the task force, we're looking at a lot of money, much more than we can afford at this point. So we, once the plan is actually developed, a budget will be developed with that. It will go to the Finance Committee and the school board. So the devices on the school buses really have yet to be approved. But we do want to approve, or asking for the board to approve, at least at this time, the devices for the school sites, because we know that that will capture everybody, at least everybody coming into the building. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
Madam Chair, I'd like to say a couple things when everyone is finished, please, before the vote.
Okay, that's great. Jeffrey, did you want to add to that?
Well, I just want to thank him for it, because if we do at some point decide to buy the ones for the bus, he just mentioned about the cost. I mean, that thing almost triples if we decide to get them for the bus, because we've already identified that the bus driver can't do it. So we'd have to hire 43 people to do it. And then they're talking about overtime for that. So that's the reason why I was just saying, make sure we get clarity on that, because the numbers almost double, triple if we decide to make that decision with the bus.
Yeah, so tonight we are voting on the 71, and then there is a possibility of an additional 64, which would be an additional 121,000 if we do the buses as well. That's at least what I have written down from the presentations. So for tonight, it's just the 71 that we're looking at. But you're right. I mean, we are looking at a potential extra cost there. Dr. Cleveland?
I would just add a couple of things. Yes, we're only asking for those tonight. I do think, though, the reality about buses, the nature of how they are enclosed, and if you've ever been on a school bus recently, you will know how easy it is for germs to spread on that bus. And one of the comments is that we're going to have as a district, and it's going to be hard, and some of that's going to come back, I'm sure, to the board. We're going to have different behavior on our school buses than we've had, or we're not going to be able to run them at all. So I think that that's one, and we're going to have some tough conversations about how you behave on a school bus. The other, I thought Lynn had an interesting, comment about maybe your child could sit a certain place. The only drawback to that is you've identified that child, and you've said to everyone that child is sick, and there are all kinds of issues with that. And so I'm a little worried about that. But I do think that with these right now, and Mike, Sal, tell me if that changed from the time I heard it, that if we don't order it now, we're not going to get it. And and if by Friday they decide that everybody's going to take temperatures, which they may or may not do, but I'm sure it's going to be a recommended practice regardless of whether it's a mandated one or not. You won't be able to find one for anywhere in this country, I'm afraid. And so I think the timing of that, it's hard to find. Have you looked to buy just a thermometer? You wait 6 to 8 weeks sometimes to get a thermometer. I waited 8 weeks for one. So we've got these locked in right now. And some of that has to do with some really proactive work that Sal and Paul Romero did to try to get these at least set aside for us in the short term. And then the other is when they come in, we don't immediately just take them out and use them. People have to be trained on them. So we need a little time to be able to set them up and to be trained and all that. It's not like they come in tomorrow and we can use them the next day. So what I was told when I was in the meeting, but correct me if that's changed now, that we were going to be hard pressed to get them here by the first day of school regardless. And so the longer we wait and the longer there's more competition for them, the less of a chance that we're going to have them on day one of the school district. And so if we don't have them, I guess the question I ask is, what are we going to do if we don't have them? So, I just think there's a couple of things to think about. And yes, I understand a lot of these things we've still got to work through. And even among the staff, we have some differences of opinion about how's the best way to utilize them. But my fear is if we don't order them now, they're going to sell them to somebody else, and we're not going to have them by the first of school. And Vice President Morgan is exactly right on target. Is everywhere, it's hard to get anything right now. I would encourage you to get on and try to buy a thermometer. Don't
I bought one. It took me 4 weeks to get mine.
Or to buy certain kinds of masks or certain kinds of other things. And so
yeah,
we're in a buyer's market right now. Absolutely. A seller's market. And so anyway, buyer's market. I'm so tired, I don't even know which of the two it is anymore. But anyway, I am worried about that. I'm worried about getting things here on time. And so that's just one more thing I hope you will consider, is that not only do we need to get them here, but we've got to train people on them. We've got to put the safeguards on them, all of those kinds of things. And that's not just an overnight job either. So thank you all for your consideration, and we'll make it work regardless. But I would feel better if we could order them quickly.
Thank you, Dr. Cleveland. I have to say, I would never be so excited when I see Clorox wipes on a shelf. It's like Christmas.
So. Awesome.
President Sal, I think Dr. Cleveland at one point in time in her speech had asked, do we need to get them right away? Is that the case? You had indicated we need to do this right away?
Vice President Morgan, President Galbraith, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland, I believe I concur with Dr. Cleveland. I think that there's a lot of components to implementing this tablet that we need to consider. Training, the tablet has to be loaded into the network. There's a certain period of time where the company has to do a setup on it. We're talking about 71 tablets, assembling to the stand. So it's not an overnight process. It's going to take some time. And I want to make sure that when we do open school, that my staff is familiar with this product. They know how to operate it. They know how to manipulate it. And that I want to have time for the IT staff to get familiar with this product and make sure that that it's set up a network and all the protections that we want, that we make sure that the components that we want turned off on this device are in fact turned off, and they're not collecting data that we don't want it to collect, and that is a time-consuming issue.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
This is Noreen Scott. board member. I have a motion on the floor.
So we do have a motion on the floor. My question, and Lauren, you might answer to this, is if we should add to that for the motion for the vote, if the board is concerned, if we should add that, we will like an approval to purchase the scanner tablets. Do we need to add in there something like with, not using, I'm having a hard time speaking to, not using the, the face recognition until policy is written on that?
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Cleveland, this is a vote on a bar.
Okay.
I don't know if we can.
That's fine. I just wanted to
clear cut, but
people's issues.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a bar. This isn't like it was a reporter or anything like that. It's a bar that we're approving.
Okay. So thank you, Lauren. So we have a motion on the floor by Noreen Scott to approve the purchase of this bar. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Jane, can you take a roll call vote on this for approval?
I will. Vice President Morgan,
Yes.
Secretary Scott,
Yes.
Board Member Cullen,
No.
Board Member Coleman,
Yes.
President Galbraith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. So motion carries 5-0 or 5-4-0-4-1. Oh my goodness. Thank you. 4-1. Thank you, everyone. We have reached the end of our meeting. For advanced planning, there is a meeting that will be next week on June 22nd. And it'll be another virtual meeting. Dr. Cleveland, do you have anything that you need to put out before we close?
Just that meeting will be on the communication strategy on how we communicate all of these changes to the community, to our parents or students, and then that will be the end of the task force reports to the board.
Okay, sounds good. So we will not have that 29th meeting. Is there a tentative meeting on the 29th?
We do not have one scheduled for the 29th, and it doesn't, unless the state throws us a really big curve on the budget. We don't need to meet on the 29th.
Okay.
But if they do, then we would have to, and so we'll see. We'll see what they do. They're talking about some pretty simple things to do, unless they mess it up, like just sanding the budget, which is pretty simple to do because you go in and you just cut 2% out of everything. But they might have other ideas, and so we would hold the 29th only if it was needed for the budget.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.